It all begins in a tavern where two warriors discuss a legendary and absolutely unbeatable SSS-level dungeon. One of them comments that nowadays it's practically impossible to find someone who hasn't heard of this terrible place. He explains that several legendary warriors and elite assassins have tried to challenge the dungeon and failed miserably. No one even managed to get past the intermediate floors, where they say the most powerful boss of all runs everything from the bottom. Meanwhile, the current heroes group tries to infiltrate the place but realizes they can't even get past the main entrance. One of the warriors becomes completely outraged upon realizing that the dungeon is far more difficult than the rumors suggested. A red screen appears warning that they do not meet the minimum level 999 requirement to enter. Terrified by the absurd demands of the SSS level, the group leader orders everyone to retreat immediately to save themselves. Observing everything from afar, a horned young man smiles, realizing that the invaders have given up and left without causing any trouble. He joins several imposing monsters and warns that even if humans were to enter, they would have to pass through them first. With a menacing look, the monster vows that it will never let any intruder get near its beloved boss. The mysterious boss thanks all his monsters for their loyalty while calmly observing the outside world. This terrifying dungeon is the Twilight Tower of Prometheus, and the boss that everyone protects is Tensisha, a level 1 boss. The young man begins to remember his past life on Earth, where he considered modern society an unfair and broken game. He reflects on how human life was constantly ranked and how those at the top always humiliated those below. To make matters worse, trying to climb the social ladder seemed only to increase the difficulty of life to an insane degree. The young man thought that perhaps he could survive simply by accepting his humble position, but he knew that this would not bring happiness. His name was Imamura Hitoya, and he simply couldn't imagine being happy living that way forever. Completely exhausted from his daily routine, he suddenly hears a strange noise while crossing the pedestrian crosswalk. Looking to the side, Hitoya sees the gigantic headlights of a truck speeding towards him. Sometime later, he begins to regain consciousness in a completely dark place, without understanding where he has ended up. As the young man tries to move, he gets a huge shock when he looks down and realizes that his hand is made only of white bones. Desperate, Hitoya begins to scream upon noticing that his arms are skeletal and possess a mysterious blue flame on his chest. He completely panics when he realizes that the bizarre transformation wasn't limited to just his upper limbs. Looking at his own body, the boy discovers that he has completely transformed into a level 5 undead. A floating screen confirms his new undead state, leaving him very confused and wondering if this is a game. Hitoya tries to remember what happened and recalls being run over by that truck in the pedestrian crossing before stopping there. Then a new system window pops up, revealing that he is in a level F dungeon called the Forest Mausoleum. While trying to process the situation, the young skeleton hears a small, adorable whimper very close to where he is. He turns around quickly with a startled expression to find out what is making that mysterious noise. To his surprise, a tiny, extremely cute level 1 wolf cub appears and begins to bark happily at him. The young skeleton stared at the little creature, unable to understand how such a small and harmless wolf had ended up there. Still a little apprehensive, he asks the cub if it won't try to devour him at any moment. Instead of attacking the cute little wolf, he simply leaps joyfully and settles confidently into his lap. The little animal lies down comfortably and begins to purr, leaving the skeleton completely unresponsive. Hitoya finally relaxes a bit and concludes that the wolf cub seems to be completely harmless to him. Suddenly, a strange noise echoes through the forest. Sending the boy into a state of high alert with wide eyes, he surveys the surrounding forest, trying to decipher the source of that suspicious sound that broke the silence. Even though he's scared, Hitoya starts to think that maybe this new world isn't as bad as he initially imagined. At that very moment, the little wolf's ears twitched as it detected something strange approaching rapidly. A red warning screen pops up out of nowhere, alerting you that a dungeon challenger has just been detected in the area. The skeleton becomes extremely confused and worried, not quite understanding what the presence of a challenger means. He looks down and notices that the little wolf cub has begun to tremble with panic as he senses the imminent danger. Nearby, an adventurer armed with a crossbow celebrates having found his prey so quickly that day. Hitoya hears a sudden noise and looks back, startled, trying to figure out who is approaching them. Before he could react, a swift arrow streaked across the air and struck the unsuspecting young skeleton squarely in the skull. With the violent impact of the surprise attack, Hitoya loses his balance and falls straight to the ground, not understanding what happened. The shooter fires again, causing the little wolf to panic as the arrow grazes him. Unfortunately, the small cub is also hit and falls unconscious right next to Hitoya's skeletal body. Lying on the ground with an arrow lodged in his head, the young man can only wonder what on earth is happening there. A pair of heavy boots stomped firmly on the ground, announcing the merciless arrival of the adventurer who attacked them. The hunter approaches the fallen bodies, boasting about having secured another easy haul of materials that day. As his vision slowly fades, the young man begins to wonder if this really is the end for him. He desperately wonders if he has just died again after being reincarnated in that mysterious new world. Suddenly, a friendly sound echoes through the area, and the little wolf cub appears safe and sound on top of a rock. Upon waking, Hitoya runs his hand through his hair, completely shocked to realize that somehow he is still alive. He stares at his own skeletal fingers, trying to decipher whether the whole situation is nothing more than a crazy nightmare. The puppy rubs affectionately against his hand, making the young man realize that it had in fact just died moments before. Hitoya remembers in terrifying detail watching everything unfold as his consciousness slowly faded to the ground. He recalls the cruel moment when the hunter skinned the wolf cub and pulled out its small fangs without any pity. The man used a sharp knife to remove the valuables from the poor animal, which had no way to defend itself. Then the hunter held the cub's bloody teeth, celebrating the easy profit he would make from that hunt. The silhouette of the merciless killer appears in the young man's mind as a reminder of just how cruel that place can be. The hunter also mentioned that the ribs of an undead creature also had a great market value for adventurers. Remembering the terrifying sensation of the man forcibly tearing out his bones makes his skeleton tremble with pure terror. The trauma of that unbearable pain remains etched in his mind, leaving Hitoya completely horrified by the memory. To their utter dismay, the system screen lights up again, alerting them to the presence of new intruders on the premises. He panics when he realizes that more humans are already invading the dungeon and that he is in great danger again. Terrified at the thought of being brutally murdered again, Hitoya knows he needs to find a hiding place right now. The little wolf cub also begins to tremble with fear behind a tree as he senses the approach of the new enemies. Without hesitation, the skeleton grabs the frightened cub so that the two can escape and hide together from the hunters. The new challengers who arrive have red dragon markings emblazoned on their bodies, demonstrating great power. They walk calmly, saying that cleaning that place is a joke, while Hitoya watches everything hidden in the bushes. The men laugh and mock the local monsters, calling them mere useless creatures from another world. Hitoya tenses up when he realizes that those arrogant humans are the challengers the system had detected earlier. One of the hunters comments that this low-level dungeon is perfect for collecting energy-boosting ingredients. The other plans to defeat the weak monsters to relieve stress before enjoying a night out on the town. They laugh maliciously, claiming they will never stop doing these easy and lucrative daily hunts. Hidden away, Hitoya tries to understand why he was reincarnated as a weak monster instead of receiving stolen hero powers. He realizes he's become just a disposable, low-level monster treated as mere ingredients for adventurers. For hunters, it is nothing more than an easy target that exists only to be hunted and have its materials extracted. The worst part is that even if he is killed, he is doomed to be reborn in that dungeon to suffer it all again. Hitoya realizes with horror that he is trapped in a true hell where pain and death repeat themselves in an eternal cycle. Suddenly, a rustling of leaves catches his attention and makes him look to the side on alert. He looks at the little wolf and realizes that the cub must have also gone through this suffering countless times. Before he could even think, one of the hunters suddenly leaped toward him, delivering a deadly sword strike. The blade grazes past, causing the little wolf to let out a yelp of fright as the skeleton tries to escape the fatal blow. Hitoya runs desperately carrying the cub, not understanding how they managed to discover his hiding place. The warrior lets out a mocking smile as he watches the bizarre scene of the skeleton trying to escape with the small animal. He warns his partner about the runaway zombie, finding it extremely funny to see a skeleton running like that. The archer calmly prepares his weapon, stating that a single well-aimed shot is all it takes to bring down the monster for good. He fires several bright energy arrows at Hitoya, who desperately tries to dodge the projectiles. The young man falls into utter despair at the thought of being forced to go through all that terrible pain again. Unfortunately, one of the arrows struck him squarely in the back, shattering part of his skeletal structure upon impact. The little wolf looks back in terror as he sees his companion get hit and begin to collapse mid-flight. With the impact, the two end up rolling across the forest floor while more arrows fly past them. Hitoya's head slammed against the damp ground, letting out a groan of pure agony as he felt his bones crack from the fall. Even after falling, he tries to protect the small cub as he sees the shadows of the hunters approaching relentlessly. The archer unleashes one last devastating attack that explodes against the young skeleton's chest, causing excruciating pain. The hunters observe the fallen bodies and comment, laughing on how ridiculously easy the F-level dungeons are. The hunter steps forward, his heavy boot ready to begin collecting the spoils of that quick battle. He coldly comments to his partner that he is going to start cutting up the little wolf to take its skin and valuable teeth. However, a sudden violent blue flash cuts through the air, preventing the man from touching the puppy's body. The archer is completely paralyzed and confused as he senses an overwhelming presence emanating from the monster he thought was dead. With his eyes gleaming an intense blue, the young skeleton reappears and coldly warns that he will not allow it. He reflects that if humans invade that place simply because it's easy to pass through, all of that needs to change at once. The young man decides he's going to transform that simple dungeon into a prison that's absolutely impossible to conquer. A system window pops up announcing that a secret mission has been activated and that the dungeon boss has just awakened. Hitoya recalls that in his past life, he always considered himself insignificant in the face of an unchangeable reality. But at that moment, he decides he wants to truly change himself to protect what remains of his new life. A blinding light explodes from the boy's body, completely blinding the two adventurers with its brilliance. The system triggers an urgent monster evolution alert as an absurd power courses through the boy's veins. His skeletal body begins to take on a new, stronger, and more defined form with very powerful, shimmering details. The transformation concludes by revealing that Hitoya has evolved into a humanoid form with dark hair and bright blue eyes. The sword-wielding warrior is shocked to notice that the undead creature's face has completely changed and become identical to that of a human. Even though he's scared, the archer tries to maintain his arrogant stance, saying that trash remains trash even after an evolution. He warns that he will fill the monster with arrows before slicing the wolf, and his partner excitedly agrees for the fight. With an extremely cold look, Hitoya repeats that he won't let them do it, and advances at an absurd speed. The two hunters let out a cry of panic when they realized that the boy had simply vanished right before their eyes. Before they could react, Hitoya appeared, flying above them with a terrifying aura, ready to strike. The boy strikes the archer with such force that he throws him straight to the ground, leaving the other hunter completely incredulous. The swordsman recoiled, trembling with fear, trying to comprehend what had just happened to his companion in a fraction of a second. Overcome with panic, the warrior screams in rage and delivers a sword blow with all the strength remaining in his body. To his dismay, the steel blade of his weapon is completely shattered into pieces, as if it were nothing but glass. Hitoya calmly emerges behind the hunter, revealing that he broke the metal sword using only a movement of his tail. The young man stares intently sideways, demonstrating that he now has complete control of the situation and his newfound powers. The man turns pale with terror upon realizing that his powerful sword has been so easily cut in half by the monster. The archer rises furiously and readies his bow, shouting that he will wipe out that damned monster once and for all. He pulls the bowstring with all his fury, channeling energy into his arrows to ensure a devastating strike. Meanwhile, his partner tries to retreat stealthily, realizing they don't stand a chance of winning the fight. The archer fires a barrage of glowing arrows at the boy, ordering him to simply shut up and die. However, his eyes widen when he realizes that the target didn't even try to dodge his most powerful attack. All the arrows shatter into tiny pieces upon impact with Hitoya's body, leaving no scratch on his skin. The archer froze in fear as he read the system information, revealing that the young man was now the powerful boss of the dungeon. The imposing Hitoya warns the invaders in a menacing manner, urging them never to return to that dungeon again. Desperate, the hunter shouts to his partner that they will be brutally murdered if they remain there for another second. The two turn around and start running frantically towards the exit gate, yelling that this fight is impossible. Using his authority as chief, Hitoya mentally orders the large stone gate of the dungeon to close immediately. The archer hears the loud bang of the doors opening and looks back with an expression of pure terror. The swordsman runs desperately upon noticing that the enormous stone doors are already closing very quickly. He manages to cross in time, but leaves his companion behind without showing the slightest remorse for his cowardly act. The archer runs, stretching out his arm, and desperately begs his partner to wait for him, but it's too late. The selfish warrior keeps running without looking back, shouting that he would never risk his life waiting for him. The immense stone doors slam shut, crushing the poor archer, who lets out a deafening cry of agony before silence falls. The gate seals completely, blocking once and for all entry and exit from that dangerous forest mausoleum. Hitoya sighs in relief as the bright color of his eyes begins to return to normal after the tense battle ends. He looks at his own trembling hands, still unable to believe that he was actually able to defeat the adventurers. The young man quickly falls to his knees on the ground and looks with great sadness at the injured little body of the wolf cub. Hitoya becomes extremely worried, wondering if the little wolf will be able to revive this time, or if he's dead forever. To his immense relief, a beautiful golden light begins to emanate from the puppy, indicating that the rebirth process has begun. Hitoya's eyes widened as he noticed a very intense golden glow emanating directly below him. The young man watched in shock as a strong, mysterious light began to rise from the ground, right where the little wolf cub had fallen. To his immense joy, the wolf cub awakens completely healthy and begins to bark with great enthusiasm. Hitoya's radiant smile of pure happiness broke into a view as he saw that his little companion had indeed managed to return to life. Thanking heaven for that miracle, the boy hugs the puppy, relieved that he hasn't lost his only friend in the world. Once the initial shock has passed, he begins to examine his own body and notices some rather bizarre details in his new form. He becomes desperate when he notices that he has grown a tail and that he only has flesh on his face, the rest of him remaining a skeleton. While the little wolf plays hanging from its tail, Hitoya screams in panic, not understanding what happened to its appearance. Then a floating holographic screen appears right in front of the young man, finally revealing his new official status screen. He reads in shock the message from the system that officially declares him the new and powerful head of that dungeon. Far away, in the bandits' hideout, the surviving warrior arrives in despair, recounting that a boss has appeared in the dungeon. He yells, sweating profusely, that the undead creature has evolved in a bizarre way and that they're going to need a dragon to clean the place up. The red-haired bandit leader laughs and mocks his companion's cowardice for failing in such a weak dungeon. Suddenly, an imposing silhouette emerges from behind, making it clear that failing in an F-level dungeon is a complete joke. The surviving warrior begins to tremble with fear as he sees his fearsome general leader approaching with a menacing gaze. The supreme leader coldly warns that he does not tolerate incompetence and that useless people have no place in his organization. After brutally finishing off the coward, the leader turns to the red-haired bandit and asks if he used to frequent that dungeon often. Sweating profusely, the red-haired bandit immediately confirms the question, demonstrating complete submission to his boss. The master orders him to use the newly acquired two-headed dragon to eliminate every last wolf in that dungeon. The leader insists that even with a new boss in charge, the dungeon remains a dump and orders the dragon to destroy everything inside. With that said, The powerful leader orders the group to move quickly to begin the relentless invasion of the dungeon. The red-haired bandit grins maliciously, staring at the caged beasts, and warns that they should be very useful in this hunt. Trapped in an iron cage, the two-headed creatures merely observe the man with their bright purple eyes. The villain grows irritated by the beast's defiant stare and arrogantly questions why they are staring at him like that. He reflects that in his world, useless tools are discarded and sliced up to be sold for a good price. The bandit concludes by demanding that the beasts prove their worth and demonstrate real usefulness in order to remain alive in that hunt. Meanwhile, back in the dungeon, Hitoya walks thoughtfully with the cub on his shoulder, trying to grasp the size of the place. He observes the colossal trees and compares the dungeon to ancient ruins, roughly the size of a football stadium. Upon closer inspection, the young man admits that things inside are quite different from what he originally expected. With few options left, the boy decides that the best thing to do now is to start exploring the depths of the forest. He walks a little further into the woods and suddenly hears some suspicious noises of leaves rustling nearby. The young skeleton notices that the environment is filled with a very dense, pure nature, and that it gives off a very peaceful vibe. He imagines that, being a dungeon, there must be some kind of magical creature or dangerous monster inhabiting that area. At that moment, the little wolf cub on his shoulder let out a joyful yelp, causing Hitoya to look intrigued in the direction the cub was pointing. The boy becomes alert when he realizes that the animal's behavior indicates that some creature is approaching rapidly. He turns cautiously to face the bushes, trying to decipher what is about to emerge from the dense forest. The noises in the bushes grow louder, leaving the boy apprehensive and prepared for any surprise attack. To their complete surprise, a second, extremely cute wolf pup leaps happily from the middle of the forest foliage. Hitoya's eyes widen, and he freezes completely when he comes face to face with yet another creature identical to his companion. However, sounds of commotion begin to echo from several other bushes at the same time, leaving the boy intrigued. Suddenly, a large pack of small, level 1 wolf pups appears, running from all sides towards the skeleton. The boy lets out a cry of astonishment when he realizes he is surrounded by a gigantic number of those adorable puppies. He finds it funny that despite being classified as wolves, they behave exactly like puppies. While the puppies dance and play around him, Hitoya catches a glimpse of something unusual shining at the base of a tree. Curious, he stares at the greenish glow and wonders if whatever is illuminating the trunk is some kind of light source. The young man approaches, fascinated, and comes across a beautiful bed of giant mushrooms that emit a strong green energy. He confesses that he had no idea that glowing mystical mushrooms existed in the ecosystem of that dungeon. A window in the system floats up, revealing that the mushrooms are actually level 1 monsters, leaving the boy shocked. Hitoya crouches down, intrigued, and brings his finger close to one of the fungi, questioning whether it can truly be considered a monster. Suddenly he notices something strange about the mushrooms, and his eyes widen as he uncovers a surprising secret about them. Hitoya compares the system screens and realizes that both the wolf cub and the mushroom are registered at level 1. The boy concludes with surprise that the wolves in the forest are as weak as mere decorative mushrooms in that dungeon. He notices that the only monsters in that entire dungeon were about 30 small wolves that happily followed him. The young man understands that this level F dungeon is actually inhabited only by extremely frail creatures. Since the minimum level to enter is only 1, the dungeon ends up becoming the perfect target for unscrupulous hunters. He recalls the suffering of the lives that were brutally taken by ruthless adventurers in search of materials. Hitoya gazes thoughtfully at the small cub beside him, reflecting on the cruelty that dominates this new world. The little wolf gazes at his new master with great innocence and curiosity, tilting his head adorably to the side. Suddenly, the cub leaps and climbs onto the skeleton's back, leaving the boy confused by the sudden reaction. The little animal begins to rub its snout affectionately against the young man's neck, demonstrating complete affection and gratitude. Hitoya turns around with a sweet and emotional look, feeling the sincere affection of the little creature he just saved. He sits surrounded by the 30 puppies and feels a comforting warmth in his chest that he hasn't felt in a long time. The young man knows that to the outside world these creatures are just material objects, but to him they are very special. With a serious and determined look, Hitoya vows to himself that he will do everything to protect each and every one of those puppies. He enjoys being smothered with affection by the pack of wolf cubs who jump and play happily around their new master. Then the boy thinks that staying near the entrance gate might be too dangerous for everyone's safety. He warns his little companions that the best thing to do now is to return to the safety of the dense forest. The boy picks up one of the puppies and firmly announces that they will be walking further into the interior of that territory. He fears that if any strong hunter invades the entrance, all the wolf pups will be easy targets and easy to hunt. Suddenly, Hitoya's eyes widen as a red danger notification flashes in his vision. He is stunned to see the system notification confirming that new invaders have just crossed the dungeon's boundaries. The boy becomes desperate, asking if this is a bad joke since they barely had time to rest. Nearby, the immense stone gate opens, revealing the terrifying presence of the new and cruel challengers of the place. With a merciless command, the bandit leader orders his fearsome winged beasts to advance relentlessly against the dungeon. Hitoya feels a terrible gust of wind and looks up in shock, realizing that something monstrous is approaching. He panics when he sees two giant level 51 dragons flying over the forest with murderous stares. Right behind him appears the red-haired bandit, laughing loudly and excitedly, confirming that the rumors about the boss were true. The young skeleton becomes even more desperate when he notices that, in addition to the flying beasts, there are armed bandits invading the area. Without wasting any time, the hunter commands his two-headed dragons to attack and destroy the dungeon boss once and for all. The terrifying beasts dive in a low flight toward Hitoya, ready to tear him in half with their sharp claws. The boy screams desperately for the little wolves to run back into the forest and hide immediately. He tries to block the dragon's claws with a powerful kick, but the strength of the high-level monster pushes him back. The wolf cubs are trapped and trembling with fear behind a bush, too weak to escape that terrifying presence. Hitoya anxiously wonders if he will truly have enough strength to protect so many defenseless creatures alone. He stares at the enemy with determination, overcoming the fear that tries to paralyze his defensive actions against the invaders. Images of the terrible carnage the hunters had caused flash through his mind, filling his heart with pure fury. The young man knows very well that he is the only one capable of protecting those innocent lives and that he cannot fail under any circumstances. Suddenly, one of the wolf cubs lets out a courageous yelp and runs to the front line, positioning himself beside his master. Hitoya looks to the side, surprised by the little animal's attitude, which shows no longer any fear of the terrible dragons. Immediately afterwards, another cub runs to join the barrier, growling with all its little strength against the beasts. To the young man's astonishment, the entire pack rushes forward, positioning themselves as a loyal shield to support him. The leader cub stares at the beasts with determination, showing that the wolf cubs are willing to fight together to the end. A reminder of their affection and mutual protection strengthens the unbreakable bond of friendship that has formed between them and the young man. The little wolf shines with a courageous, green energy, proving that even though he is weak, he possesses the heart of a true warrior. Overwhelmed with emotion and a smile on his face, Hitoya thanks his little friends for their loyalty and prepares to fight with everything he has. The hunter laughs evilly, mockingly commenting that the hunt is much more fun when the prey reacts. The boy glows with an immense blue aura and firmly warns that he won't let anyone lay a finger on his wolves. The bandit smirks, calling the young man a cheeky prey, and displays complete confidence in his destructive power. He orders his dragons to attack with full force to prove their usefulness in that deadly hunt once and for all. The monstrous dragon opens its gigantic jaws, accumulating an absurd amount of brilliant energy to unleash. The system panel floats in the air, revealing that one of the dragon's heads has just activated its special ability. Hitoya is put on high alert when he realizes that the creatures of that world also possess powerful magical abilities. The two-headed beast opens its mouth and fires a massive beam of bright blue energy directly at the boy. The young man quickly leaps to the side, narrowly escaping that terrifying, devastating burst of energy. He looks back, utterly bewildered. to see the result of the overwhelming impact of the winged creature's attack. The lightning bolt instantly froze the ground, creating an immense structure of sharp ice spikes across the area. Hitoya realizes with horror that the dragon's flames are anomalous and possess the terrifying power to freeze everything they touch. While he tries to recover, the monster's other head prepares to launch a new attack, focused in his direction. Another system notification flashes in the air indicating that the dragon's second head has also activated its fire ability. This time, a jet of scalding fire is fired, forcing the boy to do a somersault high into the air to dodge it. The extreme heat erupts from the ground, melting the earth and transforming the area into a veritable sea of burning lava. The boy is astonished to see that the fire was hot enough to completely melt the rocky floor of the dungeon. He explains that the abilities function like the special moves he used to see in video games from his past life. Hitoya concludes that special abilities grant absurd advantages in combat and that he needs to understand how they work. If one dragon freezes and the other melts everything, the boy fearfully deduces that the hunter must also have his own technique. He anxiously wonders if the cruel beast hunter possesses some overpowered skill up his sleeve for the fight. He then realizes that if others have powers, there's a good chance he might have awakened some as well. To his surprise, the system responds to his thoughts and displays a message informing him that a technique is available. Hitoya becomes extremely excited upon confirming that he does indeed possess a special ability that can be activated instantly. He tries to quickly read the details on the floating panel while dodging the dragon's continuous aerial attacks. The ability is called Rebirth, and allows him to revive and copy the techniques of any challenger who fails there. The boy is shocked to realize the absurd potential of this power, which allows him to steal the abilities of hunters. The bandit shouts furiously, ordering the boy to pay attention to the fight, and launches a new surprise attack with his crossbow. Several bright, fast-moving arrows are fired towards Hitoya, who tries to quickly position himself to dodge them. The magical projectiles fly through the air at high speed, creating dangerous trails of purple energy in their path. The boy is startled to notice that the archer's arrows simply vanished into thin air mid-air. Even without being able to see the projectiles, he uses his sharp reflexes to dodge at the last second before impact. The villain laughs mockingly, calling him an interesting prey, while the system warns that the sniper technique is active. Hitoya understands that the invisible arrows are part of the hunter's secret technique for catching his targets by surprise. He watches the projectiles collide with the ground and realizes that the arrows actually become completely invisible after being fired. The young man performs incredible aerial acrobatics to escape both aerial attacks and the hunter's invisible shots. He devises a strategy focused on defeating the archer, first so he can fight the dragons without distractions. Hitoya runs at high speed, zigzagging through the forest while the opposing flames of the dragons explode around him. The hunter laughs loudly, crossbow in hand, daring the boy to keep running and see how far he can go. The boy quickens his pace, ignoring the villain's taunts, and focuses solely on finding an opening to counterattack the group. Suddenly, a sharp cry of pain echoes through the place, drawing Hitoya's attention, who looks up in surprise at the dungeon sky. He watches in shock as one of the hunter's own invisible arrows ends up hitting the back of one of his dragons. The bandit curses his own creature, calling it a clumsy idiot, demanding it stand up and threatening to turn it into decoration. The poor two-headed beast groans in pain, the arrow lodged in its back, showing it is exhausted and badly wounded. Hitoya indignantly questions how the man could shoot his own ally without showing the slightest concern for the animal. The villain shrugs and arrogantly retorts that monsters are not allies, but rather tools that are easy to replace. He claims that if the beasts break, they are discarded because they exist only to serve humans and generate easy profit for them. The man lets out evil laughs, while the poor wounded creature remains huddled on the ground, suffering from its injury. Those cruel words remind Hitoya of how monsters are treated as mere worthless objects in this world. He recalls with hatred the hunters who kill the creatures purely for fun and money, showing no pity whatsoever. However, the young man remembers the sincere affection he received from the little wolf cubs and decides that he will not accept that injustice. The two-headed beast struggles to stand, but the red chains around its neck prevent it from escaping. Hitoya quickly steps forward and positions himself in front of the injured creatures, ready to defend them from their owner's attack. The bandit's eyes widened, and he gasped in surprise upon seeing the dungeon master protecting the dragons that had attacked him earlier. The boy unleashes an immense pillar of light and magical energy around his body, preparing to deliver the decisive blow. The bandit is paralyzed and shocked to see the boy advancing towards him with overwhelming speed. Focusing his newfound energy on his fists, the boy vows that he will never accept monsters being used as tools. With a single, extremely powerful punch, Hitoya shatters the hunter's beast and breaks the magical control collar. The man recoils in terror upon seeing that his combat weapon and command collar were destroyed in an instant. Hitoya turns around with a dark and intimidating look and disdainfully asks what the hunter intends to do now. The red-haired hunter begins to sweat and tremble with fear as he realizes he is completely unarmed in the face of danger. Desperate, the villain yells at his two-headed beasts, demanding that they advance and protect their human master. But freed from the magical leash of submission, the two dragons merely look at each other, ignoring the commands of their former master. The man roars furiously, demanding that the beasts move, while the broken control chains fall to the ground. He shouts, cursing the dragons as useless trash, and repeats that tools that serve no purpose deserve to be destroyed. However, the beasts simply take flight and soar high, hovering menacingly right above the villain's head. One of the monster's heads glows with icy energy and stares at its former master with a look of pure hatred and vengeance. The bandit freezes in fear upon realizing that the situation has reversed and that now he is the cornered prey. The beast unleashes its freezing blast directly at the hunter, who doesn't even have time to try and escape the attack. The man screams in agony as he is frozen alive, lamenting having been defeated by monsters he so despised. The dragon coldly observes the outcome of its attack, certain that its freedom will never be threatened again. The body of the fearsome beast hunter is completely covered by a thick layer of solid ice in the middle of the dungeon. A golden screen appears in the air, confirming the invader's death and announcing the total failure of that dungeon raid. At that moment, the system glows in bluish tones, alerting the skeleton that activating a special ability is possible. The boy excitedly realizes that he has finally fulfilled all the necessary requirements to use his rebirth power. Without wasting any time, Hitoya commands the system to activate the special technique focused on stealing the power of the defeated hunter. The holographic panel begins loading the data and confirms that the skill copying process was completed successfully. The boy glows brightly as the system alerts him that he has just acquired the hunter's stealth shooting technique. Hitoya is amazed to discover that he can indeed steal and use the special techniques of the enemies he defeats. The dragons land cautiously and stare at the skeleton suspiciously, unsure what to expect from that strange boy. The immense beasts let out a low growl and retreat slightly, maintaining a defensive posture in case they need to fight again. Hitoya senses the animal's fear and immediately deactivates his combat aura to show that he doesn't want to cause trouble. He extends his hands patiently, asking the creatures to remain calm and not be frightened by his presence. The boy sincerely apologizes for scaring the monsters and leaving the two heads of the dragon quite confused. The young man smiles amicably and sincerely assures them that he has no intention whatsoever of starting a fight against them. He knows that to those beasts he must seem like just a strange monster, but he wants to show that he comes in peace. Suddenly, a golden notification appears, revealing an exclusive dungeon boss skill for the boy. Hitoya is surprised to notice that previously unseen window in the system, detailing a power he had never seen before. The panel explains that the Forest Mausoleum's unique technique allows for the addition of new creatures, such as local monsters. The young man's eyes widen when he discovers he possesses a second, highly stolen special power associated with his position as boss. He becomes fascinated when he realizes that this technique grants him the ability to recruit new monsters for the dungeon. The system displays a question asking if the user wants to add the level 51 dragon as a protector monster. Hitoya is thrilled at the prospect of recruiting such powerful creatures to help defend the entire territory. He notes that the name of his second dungeon boss power is the legendary Guardian Spirit Blessing technique. The boy realizes that with this power, he has a real chance to transform those dragons into official allies of the dungeon. Having powerful dragons capable of breathing fire and ice by their side would be an incredible boost in protecting the little wolves. However, he remembers that the place will continue to be targeted by hunters and looks seriously at the two creatures. He warns the beasts that the man who controlled them is gone and that they are completely free to return to the outside world. The young man calmly asks them what they wish to do from now on, leaving the choice entirely in their hands. The dragons sadly remember their former master, who treated them as mere disposable tools, devoid of feelings. The two heads stare intently at the skeleton, analyzing the unusual kindness shown by that young guardian. They find Hitoya a very strange boy, since he could simply use the system's power to control them. Despite all the strangeness, the beasts conclude that they liked the boy and felt no anger towards him. To Hitoya's surprise, the two creatures slowly walk towards him, bowing gently and peacefully. He asks them emotionally if they truly wish to stay there and become new residents of the dungeon along with them. The two dragons nod in agreement, accepting Hitoya's proposal to become part of their new home. The young man grinned from ear to ear and sincerely thanked those giant creatures for their trust and loyalty. Without wasting any time, the boy extends his hands and activates his special boss power to add the dragons to the dungeon. The system processes the information and confirms that the two-headed dragon has been officially added as a guardian monster. At the same time, the panel indicates that the number of invaders has reached 0, and a mysterious golden glow envelops the place. The young man discovers that when the number of challengers reaches 0, all the local monsters fully recover their energy and health. Suddenly, a soft rustling of bushes catches the boy's attention, and he looks up, intrigued, to see what is emerging. A cute little paw cautiously emerges from among the leaves, revealing that peace has finally returned to the forest. The whole pack of little wolves runs happily towards the boy, barking happily to see that the danger has passed. Hitoya sighs in relief upon seeing the puppies running safe and sound, and asks affectionately if they are all truly all right. The little animals begin to jump and bark with joy, making a real party around the young skeleton. They rub against the boy affectionately, thanking him for fighting so bravely to save everyone's lives. The young man looks at the leader cub, knowing that he only managed to keep everyone safe because of the courage the little wolf demonstrated. He extends his skeletal hand with all the gentleness in the world and affectionately strokes the little animal's head. With a friendly smile on his face, Hitoya sincerely thanks everyone for their companionship and essential help during the fight. The puppy blushes shyly and lets out a whiny, happy yelp, closing its eyes to enjoy the master's petting. The whole flock starts jumping for joy, doing a lively little dance while the dragons watch the scene amicably. Hitoya observes the joyful celebration, feeling an immense peace he had never experienced in his entire life. He sadly remembers when he was weak and couldn't save anyone, but celebrates the fact that everyone is doing well today. The boy hugs himself, feeling an indescribable relief as he realizes that his determination was enough to keep everyone safe. For the first time in a long time, he feels that his life has finally gained purpose and that he has taken a real step forward. Suddenly, a voice echoes telepathically from the dragons, indicating that despite his human face, the boy is not from this world. They question the true identity of the young skeleton, staring at him with great curiosity and intelligent eyes. The boy jumps in fright and screams in complete shock upon discovering that magical creatures are capable of communicating. Climbing onto a tree branch, Hitoya gazes at the immense creatures flying freely through the green sky of that vast dungeon. The two-headed dragon explains in detail what types of cruel adventurers usually invade that dungeon. They reveal that the term challenger in that location refers specifically to the fearsome hunters of the Ryuseizoku Guild. The beasts explain that the guild captures monsters to sell as tools, enslaving the creatures without any pity. Hitoya discovers, to his dismay, that the dragons have been captured by this guild of scoundrels and fears they will be returned to the dungeon. The dragons confirm the danger, revealing that the fearsome guild leader Fucho will surely come after them sooner or later. They fearfully assert that the leader's power is on a completely different level and that he rules everything through terror. The boy realizes that these painful memories of captivity are terrible recollections that the dragons would prefer to erase from their minds. The two-headed monsters exchange a silent, knowing glance, demonstrating the shared pain they share. Hitoya sincerely thanks them for the important warning and promises to use all his strength to defend them from that guild. The young man raises his finger with a confident expression and says he has a very clever suggestion for the group's next step. He proposes that all the monsters remain hidden deep in the forest while he guards the entrance to the dungeon. Showing the map, the boy explains that since there is only one entrance, he will be able to detect any attack by watching from the top of a tree. The dragons listened attentively to the strategy, analyzing the courageous attitude of their new leader who volunteered for the watch. The little wolf grumbles sulkily, his eyes filled with worry and sorrow, watching his master prepare to face such danger. Hitoya gently strokes the puppy and assures him with a sweet smile that everything will be all right, and that he knows how to take care of himself very well. Sitting high on a branch, he observes his status screen, admitting to himself that he also feels quite anxious. The boy rereads the details of his special power that allows him to permanently copy and accumulate the techniques of the defeated. The boy concludes with determination that the more opponents he manages to defeat, the stronger and more invincible he will become there. Your goal is to defeat the invaders to accumulate skills and exterminate the hunters to bring eternal peace to the dungeon. Even knowing that peace doesn't last forever, he vows to fight fiercely, taking one step at a time to protect his new home. Suddenly, Hitoya and the monsters are startled by a deafening noise that completely shatters the silence of the forest. The system screen flashes red, triggering an urgent alert that new challengers have just invaded the territory. The immense stone gate of the dungeon begins to open slowly, creaking heavily and frighteningly at the entrance. A new group of ruthless mercenaries with red dragon markings emblazoned on their bodies marches menacingly. The brute with the club laughs loudly, cursing the former hunter for running away with the beasts, and vows revenge. From high up in the tree branch, Hitoya confirms in horror that a huge group of dragon hunters has just invaded the place. The young skeleton becomes quite tense, as he admits that he has never faced so many opponents at once in his entire life. The bandits chat, laughing, and suggest making a bet to see who can get the most kills that day. Hitoya's heart overflowed with fury, and he clenched his fists tightly upon hearing the cruel words of his enemies. He mentally warns that he will not tolerate the invaders treating the lives of the local monsters as toys in their games. Even when outnumbered, the boy knows he has good options and immediately activates his new invisible attack technique. Face to face with a horde of heavily armed mercenaries, the young man analyzes the group, trying to devise the best strategy. He decides that the first thing to do is to drastically reduce the initial combat power of those dangerous opponents. Silently and precisely, the boy commands his hidden power so that the shots destroy the enemy's weapons first. In a fraction of a second, the weapons of several hunters simply shattered, leaving everyone completely shocked. The bandits panic completely, not understanding what happened, and start shouting, asking if they suffered a skill attack. One of the most arrogant hunters scoffs at the situation, telling the others not to freak out over such a weak dungeon. Hitoya realizes that without their weapons in hand, the human warriors seem completely incapable of using the techniques. He deduces, intrigued, that the abilities of humans in that mysterious world depend exclusively on and reside in their weapons. The young man reflects with wide eyes, realizing that if this logic is true, he has just discovered a gigantic weakness in them. One of the hunters attempts to channel energy to activate his halberd's special ability and engage in direct combat. However, the weapon breaks instantly before delivering the blow, proving that humans depend on physical objects. Hitoya concludes, very excitedly, that destroying the enemy weapons will completely neutralize the forces of any invader. He seizes the opening and advances, methodically breaking the shields and swords of the other hunters who were trying to fight back. The warriors despair when they realize they can't see the trajectory of the swift blows that destroy their equipment. A mercenary wearing special glasses manages to locate the boy high above after activating his secret vision magnifying technique. The boy realizes that the hunter's techniques are not only useful for attacking, but also for helping in the search for targets. Another hunter advances, unleashing a sharp slash of air with his sword after activating the powerful Windblade ability. Hitoya performs an impressive acrobatic dodge, escaping the swift cut that rips through the scenery right in front of him. He focuses all his attention on dodging the most dangerous special attacks to conserve energy and tire out his opponents. The boy runs straight towards the rest of the mercenary band, demonstrating that he has no fear of combat whatsoever. The bandits shout furiously, ordering everyone to advance at once to try and corner the boy by any means necessary. Hitoya bursts into their midst, his eyes gleaming, vowing to destroy every piece of equipment they are holding. He strikes with mastery, shattering the spears and daggers of all the mercenaries who tried to approach to attack. The men watch in horror as their last defenses crumble into useless pieces of iron in their own hands. Completely unarmed and terrified, the adventurers retreat in panic, realizing they have no chance of survival. They admit with despair that the creature before them is certainly not a disposable monster from an F-level dungeon. One of the hunters simply gives up the fight, throws in the towel, and announces that he's out of that suicide mission immediately. The other mercenaries agree and begin running desperately towards the exit, shouting that they need to get out of there quickly. The entire gang flees in disarray, abandoning the dungeon with their tails between their legs to save their own lives. Several system alerts flash in the air, officially confirming the mass evacuation of all challengers from the dungeon. Hitoya silently observes the escape, noting with surprise that the invaders simply gave up on completing the dungeon. Suddenly, a system notification appears in blue, revealing that Hitoya's boss ability has been activated again. The boy is very intrigued and surprised to see that unexpected message appear right after the warrior's cowardly escape. The panel shows that he has just acquired 3 new special techniques, such as the Windblade, and increased vision of his rivals. Hitoya is completely speechless when he confirms that he successfully stole the abilities of the gang that escaped. He finally understands the logic behind his special copying technique and breaks into a determined smile at the discovery. The boy deduces that for the system to escape the dungeon is equivalent to failing in it, which activates the conditions for stealing its power. This means that the skills of absolutely any hunter who escapes the dungeon will become theirs forever. However, near the entrance, one last enraged gunman shouts indignantly upon seeing that all his partners have fled like cowards. He pulls out his bow and insists madly that this F-level dungeon should be an extremely easy gathering location. The insane man refuses to leave empty-handed and plans one last cowardly act to get what he wants. He decides to set fire to the entire deep forest to force the monsters out and activates his flaming bow technique. Screaming with hatred, the villain unleashes a massive and devastating fireball that surges forward, burning everything in its path towards the bushes. The wolf pups watch the immense wall of flames rapidly approaching and panic completely at the danger. Hitoya appears with an extremely furious look, vowing through clenched teeth that he will not allow that destruction. The boy immediately activates his newly acquired Windblade ability, unleashing a devastating energy slash. Hitoya's wind blast cuts the enormous fireball in half, completely neutralizing the threat of the flames in the forest. The attack advances relentlessly, severing the arm of the insane hunter, destroying his bow, and completely disarming him. The gunman falls to the ground, screaming in pure agony and pain under the horrified gaze of the other mercenaries who were watching everything. The surviving warrior is thrown into utter panic upon realizing that the skeleton has perfectly copied and used his techniques. Hitoya walks calmly through the mist of power, making it clear that the fate of that dungeon has radically changed. With bright sky-blue eyes, the boy announces that this place will no longer be used as a hunting ground for humans. The surviving bandits tremble with terror and let out high-pitched screams of panic at the intimidating presence of the young leader. Without a second thought, they turn around and flee at full speed, abandoning the wounded and running desperately for the exit. The invaders rush through the exit portal, fleeing the dungeon in fear of being annihilated by Hitoya's power. Immediately afterwards, the immense stone gate begins to descend slowly, sealing the entrance once more with a thunderous noise. The doors close completely, leaving the boy in total silence amidst the scene littered with the wreckage of weapons. Hitoya stares thoughtfully at the ground, reflecting on the battle he just fought against the fearsome monster hunters. He sadly remembers when he was weak and couldn't save anyone, but celebrates the fact that everyone is doing well today. But today, the boy proudly celebrates having faced an entire band of mercenaries and protected all the wolf cubs. With slightly flushed cheeks, he gives a gentle smile of relief and celebrates that the plan worked out after all. Surrounded by his new and loyal companions, the boy sees the system screen indicate that there are no more intruders on the premises. In the bandits' hideout, an aristocrat comments to the leader Alvara about the men's shameful failure in Dungeon F. The fearsome leader Alvara coldly retorts, saying he doesn't remember ever having such weak and useless people under his command. He stares at his ally with a cruel and menacing look and warns that in his guild, weak warriors are only good for food. The nobleman Pedro laughs cruelly and comments that he finds it amusing when useless warriors are given as food. Suddenly, Bodo and the survivors rush into the room trembling with fear to deliver urgent news to their boss, Alvara. Sweating profusely, the bandit shouts in terror that it's impossible to complete that F-level dungeon because of the new boss there. Alvara turns slowly with a disdainful expression, demanding to know what really happened that was so serious about the mission. The warrior explains with panic in his eyes that the monster not only copied the techniques, but used several of them at the same time. He details, trembling, how the creature used multiple abilities with extreme ease, as if it were nothing. Bodo warns that this chief is far too dangerous and that he is certainly no ordinary creature of the forest. Alvara stares at his subordinate with a sadistic smile and asks if they've only returned to make excuses for their failure. With eyes gleaming a murderous red, the boss warns that he has no patience for dealing with useless trash in his guild. A monstrous shadow emerges from behind the failed hunters, who are left completely paralyzed by their cruel fate. Alvara commands his supreme dragon to devour those useless men, serving them as fresh food right then and there. The mercenaries let out desperate cries as they are attacked by the beast under the cruel command of the hunter's leader. The nobleman Pedro calmly sips his wine, laughing derisively at the bloody spectacle unfolding right before him. Although he finds it funny, he admits that the story about the appearance of a boss in an F-level dungeon is very bizarre. Pedro thoughtfully reflects that, theoretically, such a powerful creature shouldn't be ruling a low-level dungeon. He questions whether the rumor is true, but admits that this whole strange situation has a strong whiff of a secret conspiracy. Alvara recalls that his sharpshooter and the two-headed dragon have not yet returned from their mission in that dungeon. The nobleman Pedro smirks, his greed betraying the value of the materials they could extract from the rare monster. He mentions that rare monsters yield valuable materials and suggests that Alvara personally investigate the mystery. Pedro suggests that the leader go hunt down the new boss, and Alvara agrees to the proposal, eyeing the guild's future profits. Alvara displays a sadistic smile, confirming that he liked the idea of personally confronting such strong and rare prey. He demands as a condition that his share of the profits from that hunt be doubled and toasts the business deal with his ally. Meanwhile, back in the dungeon, the day dawns sunny and peaceful, revealing the untouched beauty of the magical forest. From high on a branch, Hitoya hears a small wolf cub barking happily below, drawing the young skeleton's attention. The puppy wags its tail excitedly and barks incessantly, trying to show something very interesting that is hidden among the bushes. The boy looks intrigued and asks affectionately what is happening as he prepares to climb down from the tree branch. Hitoya lands lightly on the ground, his tail wagging, and gazes at his little companion, who seems very excited. Without wasting any time, the little wolf turns around and starts running happily, focused on guiding his master into the forest. Hitoya follows the cub with curiosity and wonders if something extraordinary has just happened deep in the forest. Hitoya follows the wolf cub through the dense forest, trying to understand what the creature wants to show him that is so urgent. The boy notices they've walked quite far into the woods when the cub jumps into a hollow tree trunk. As the young man crossed the passage, he encountered a very bright emerald green flash and became quite intrigued. He realizes with astonishment that the mysterious glowing spot is exactly the mushroom patch he saw before. The cub lets out an excited yelp, pointing forward, leaving the skeleton curious about what's so special about it. Looking ahead, Hitoya's eyes gleam intensely, reflecting a gigantic golden light that appears out of nowhere. An immense and majestic golden door magically appears floating in the middle of that bed of shimmering mushrooms. The boy takes a step back, completely perplexed and shocked by that colossal structure that emanates a divine aura. He stares at the immense golden door in disbelief, wondering what a portal of that size is doing hidden there. The little wolf wags its excited rear end, while Hitoya realizes that the golden entrance definitely wasn't there before. Still very wary, the young man cautiously extends his skeletal hand to touch the gleaming surface of the portal. The instant her fingers touch the golden metal, a powerful wave of magical shock reverberates throughout her body. A colossal flash of golden light explodes from the door, causing the boy to cover himself to avoid being blinded by the intense brightness. The dungeon system emits a high-pitched sound, announcing that the dungeon master's identity has been fully verified. Hitoya's eyes widened as he saw a notification revealing that the dungeon-level progression system had been activated. An immense storm of magical energy and dust swirls around the boy, creating a very tense atmosphere in the area. Gradually, the blinding light begins to fade, revealing the golden door that now floats silently in the cave. Holding the trembling little wolf in his lap, the boy wonders what that light was and realizes that the trembling has suddenly stopped. A red message appears on the portal, warning that the dungeon level-up requirements have not been met. Hitoya thoughtfully reads the notice. Understanding that there are indeed strict rules for leveling up in the dungeon, the sign warns that the area beyond the door is an unexplored sector and that the gate will remain locked until further notice. The system reinforces in detail that the only requirement to open the large gate is advancing to the next level. The boy thoughtfully concludes that to open that secret passage, he will need to level up the dungeon. The dragons land beside her, observing the portal with curiosity and wondering what all that light means. Hitoya looks back in relief at the arrival of his new allies, who seem as surprised as he is by the portal. The immense beasts wonder, intrigued, if a low-level dungeon is truly capable of evolving in rank. The boy tensely agrees, commenting that the whole situation seems extremely unusual according to the rules of that world. One of the dragons shakes both heads, stating that it has never heard of an evolving dungeon in its entire life. Hitoya asks what happens when the dungeon levels up, but the monsters admit they don't know the answer either. The boy stares at the immense gleaming golden gate and begins to suspect that his dungeon is truly unique and special. He reflects on the unexplored sector warning on the holographic panel and becomes eager to discover what lies behind it. The immense golden door shines dazzlingly, seemingly concealing profound secrets that no being has ever reached before. He recalls the unique boss skills screen that the system revealed in an unprecedented way, which greatly intrigued him. The panel detailed the forest mausoleum's unique technique that allows for the addition of new creatures such as local monsters. At that moment, the young man was speechless upon realizing that he possessed a second special skill linked to his position. He found the idea of being able to recruit strong creatures to bolster the security of all the little wolves fascinating. The system asked if he wished to recruit the level 51 dragons, leaving the animals quite surprised. Hitoya realized that with this technique, he would have a real chance to transform those beasts into official allies of the forest. However, when he looked at the dragons, he noticed that they still maintained an expression of fear and distrust in their eyes. The young man acted in an understanding manner, saying that it was okay if they didn't want to talk, and that he would respect their space. Suddenly, Hitoya gets a terrible fright when he feels the ground shake violently, breaking the calm of the place. The dragons warn in terror that the deafening roar indicates the main gate to the dungeon has been forced open. The young man focuses his gaze towards the entrance, realizing tensely that new invaders have just entered his territory. A red danger notification flashes in the air, triggering an urgent alert that challengers have invaded the dungeon. Colossal, monstrous claws stomp forcefully across the earth, heralding the arrival of an extremely powerful creature. The fearsome leader of the Ryushizoku Guild appears mounted on his beast, vowing to destroy and slice up everything he finds in the area. The system identifies the arrogant villain, revealing that his name is Alvara, and that he has a level 66 swordsmanship. The two heads of the dragon fall into utter despair upon recognizing the cruel leader who kept them captive and enslaved. Hitoya swallowed hard as he realized that the power of that enemy warrior was infinitely superior to that of all those he had defeated. Even though he's scared, he knows that if he doesn't stop the leader there, the hell of the cruel hunts against the monsters will never end. A gigantic, sharp ice spike begins to emerge from the ground, imbued with a freezing, magical aura. The boy's fist glows with immense electrical energy, built up to deliver a fatal blow. Hitoya decides to use all the skills he has acquired so far to face the enemy head-on. He vows to use all his powers to defeat the fearsome leader once and for all. The system screen glows, activating the invisible attack that advances like a devastating beam of light. Alvara uses his giant sword to block the surprise attack without showing any difficulty. The young skeleton is shocked to realize that his invisible attack was easily blocked. With a mocking smile, the enemy leader demonstrates that their weak power is not enough to stop him. He mocks the boy, arrogantly asking why he's trying to hide in the middle of the fight. Hitoya realizes with alarm that the warrior has already discovered his exact location high up in that tree. The cruel leader looks up and remarks disdainfully that he has finally found the mastermind of that dungeon. The bandits position themselves at the base of the tree, ready to surround the boy and his flying allies. The villain stares at the two-headed dragons and realizes they are the beasts that had escaped captivity. He notes with surprise that the creatures managed to break free from the magical collars of subjugation. The warrior says he doesn't care what happened but vows to punish their insolence anyway. With a bloodthirsty look, the man warns that disobedient tools are of no use to him. The two creatures begin to tremble with terror as they feel the terrible, murderous pressure coming from their former master. Hitoya stands in front of the dragons and shouts that they are not anyone's disposable tools. The leader laughs and finds it ridiculous to see the dungeon ingredient trying to protect his useless tools. While the villain finds the situation amusing, the young boss prepares to use his best skills. With a war cry, the villain orders all his soldiers to advance and massacre the local monsters. The dragons exchange a quick glance and decide that they too will fight to defend their new friend and protector. One of the creature's heads begins to concentrate an immense sphere of magical energy in its jaws. The system confirms that the beast activated its powerful special technique to unleash a freezing blast. Immediately afterwards, the other head activates its ability, unleashing scalding flames against the enemies. The combined fire and ice attacks hit the front line, causing the bandits to scream in utter despair. The boy is impressed when he sees the immense destructive power of the special techniques used by the dragons. The attacks manage to halt the mercenaries' advance by temporarily paralyzing the group with explosions. Hitoya thanks the dragons for their support and immediately activates his wind blade technique to attack the flock. He decides to combine the wind attack with another secret power to ensure the total annihilation of his opponents. The new combined technique curves the trajectory of the air blades, allowing them to hit targets that were trying to dodge. The curved gusts of wind cut the warriors off by surprise, giving them no chance to escape or block. Furious at the defeat of his henchmen, the enemy leader decides to focus his wrath on the traitorous beasts first. He commands his gigantic winged mount to devour the rebellious dragons without showing any mercy. A mysterious circle of red energy appears in the air and encircles the neck of one of the two-headed beasts. With a metallic snap, the fearsome submission collar snaps shut, violently restraining the animal once more. The dragon becomes completely paralyzed as the evil energy begins to dominate its consciousness and actions. The villain explains, laughing, that the power of the subjugation ring is absolute, and that monsters only serve to obey. He disdainfully warns that if the beasts dare to disobey again, he will use even crueler methods against them. The cruel warrior threatens to have one of the heads assassinate the other half if they try to resist the order. The creature cries out in panic upon realizing the level of sadism of the man who holds absolute control over its destiny. Suddenly, the other half of the dragon desperately tries to take flight to escape the villain's range. The beast stares at its master in terror, realizing there is no escape from the torment it is about to suffer. The leader's monstrous mount opens its colossal jaws, ready to devour the defenseless prey in one gulp. The little dragon closes its eyes, knowing it is too slow to escape that giant maw. In the last millisecond, Hitoya appears and positions himself in the middle, blocking the attack of the great beast with his body. The animal opens its eyes in complete shock upon realizing that, miraculously, it is still alive. The young skeleton grabs his ally in his arms and uses his agility to escape the reach of the enemy's jaws. Alvara roars furiously, ordering his henchmen to chase the fleeing skeleton and not let him escape. The boy hugs the frightened dragon and notices with great compassion that the poor animal continues to tremble with fear. Hitoya apologizes to the two-headed dragon upon realizing that it is still terrified of its former master. The young skeleton firmly orders the wounded beast to flee to the deepest and safest part of the forest. The dragons are astonished and ask if the boy really plans to face the entire enemy pack alone. Down below, the mercenaries locate the boy at the top of the branch and shout for everyone to shoot without mercy. Hitoya assures his new teammates that he will be fine and prepares to jump right into the action. He smiles gently and vows to fight until he secures the ultimate freedom of all creatures. The two dragons watch the boy with great concern, knowing the absurd danger he is about to face. Without hesitation, the young chief leaps from the tree, diving with all his might towards the heavily armed hunters. The henchmen advance in a group, weapons drawn, yelling that they will annihilate the boss of that dungeon. With a relentless gaze, Hitoya vows not to let anyone get hurt and decides to handle everything himself. The boy activates his enhanced detection and vision techniques, confirming that 10 mercenaries remain. He combines the wind blade with his invisible attack, slicing through opponents with extreme speed. The boy dodges with mastery and delivers precise wind slashes, taking down more enemies in his path. Lying on the ground, the few surviving warriors murmur in terror as they witness such physical strength. With a completely cold and focused expression, the boy analyzes the situation, leaving only a single enemy. The young skeleton stares at the dangerous leader Alvara, who watches his defeated men on the ground without caring. The villain rages angrily, calling his own fallen warriors useless for failing so easily. Alvara commands his gigantic mount by activating a macabre technique that makes the monster glow with red light. The colossal dragon opens its sharp jaws while the terrifying control collar emits an ominous glow. Hitoya takes a step back in fright, noticing that the immense beast has just unleashed an absurd amount of magic. To everyone's despair, the creature ferociously bites one of the wounded soldiers who was lying on the ground. The boy's eyes widened in complete shock as he witnessed that bizarre and bloody scene. The mercenaries scream in utter despair as they are swallowed alive by the very monster allied with the guild. Hitoya covered his mouth in horror, unable to believe that the villain had ordered the beast to devour his allies. The beast mercilessly chews its victims with blood-covered teeth in the middle of the dark forest. Gradually, the dragon's body begins to undergo a bizarre physical mutation, increasing in size. The leader explains in a sadistic way that his beast gains much more resistance by consuming human flesh. The monster's colossal claws become incredibly heavy and sharp, ready to tear apart any target. The dragon emerges gigantic and terrifying after completing the macabre evolution of its physical multiplication power. The monster roars deafeningly, causing the entire underground structure of the dungeon to tremble violently. He opens his huge mouth, concentrating a colossal sphere of purple, destructive energy to shoot. Hitoya realizes in despair that the heat from that attack is enough to burn down the entire forest of the dungeon. The boy knows he needs to stop that shot immediately to avoid a tragedy with the little wolves. However, he anxiously wonders how he will be able to stop a monster of that size using only his physical strength. Suddenly, The boy's eyes light up as he notices a very important detail in the structure of the gigantic enemy. He remembers when he broke the first dragon's collar and deduces that destroying the ring might free the beast. Hitoya channels his magic and activates the wind blade, focusing on destroying the red collar of subjugation. The sharp air blast flies at high speed across the battlefield toward the dragon's neck. With absurd reflexes, the fearsome Alvara suddenly appears, wielding his metal sword to block the blow. The wind blade explodes against the villain's defense, preventing the attack from reaching the monster's control collar. The young chief's eyes widened as he saw that the warrior had intercepted his surgical movement at the last second. Alvara angrily warns that he will not allow a mere F-rank dungeon boss to try and ruin his plans. The swordsman grins sadistically and channels an immense dark energy. Activating his most lethal sword technique, Hitoya feels a terrible, overwhelming magical pressure and prepares for the villain's devastating counterattack. Right in front of him, the mutant dragon finishes charging its energy and aims its devastating heat beam at him. The boy knows that if he doesn't stop that gunshot, the entire dungeon ecosystem will be destroyed. He stares at the gleaming collar and confirms that this object is indeed the weak point and the key to all control. The monster hunter sports an arrogant posture, firmly believing that his victory is already guaranteed. Without hesitation, the young skeleton leaps toward the target and activates his special curved blade ability. Alvara yells furiously that he will never let anyone touch the ring and delivers a devastating defensive blow. The monster hunter activates his powerful earthquake technique, generating a massive crimson explosion. The devastating impact of the blow opens a colossal crater in the ground, forcing the boy to retreat quickly. Alvara laughs sadistically as his enormous dragon continues to gather energy to unleash its fury. Hitoya stares at the bright beam of light and realizes he is about to be struck by a fatal attack from his rival. The colossal dragon unleashes an overwhelming blast of magical flames that illuminates the entire dense forest. The young skeleton knows he has no time to hesitate and runs at high speed to dodge the flames. He focuses on merging his invisible attack with another secret power to shatter the collar of subjugation. Determined to protect the dungeon and his friends, the boy vows to give his all in that final move. The blue energy blast cuts through the air with absolute precision, striking the great beast squarely in the neck area. Alvara gasped in surprise as he realized his blocking mechanism had failed against the boy's incredible speed. The boy looks up in surprise, noticing a strong magical reaction occurring in the subjugation collar. Suddenly, the two small dragons appear flying in to support the young skeleton in that decisive battle. They warn that they will distract the master and his great dragon so that Hitoya can focus solely on breaking the necklace. The two creatures unleash their elemental fire and ice attacks, creating a perfect defensive barrier. The hunter leader becomes extremely angry when he sees mere insignificant prey daring to rebel against him. He screams angrily, questioning how those useless monsters think they are strong enough to defeat him. The villain leaps towards the small beasts in a fit of rage, vowing to kill them all right there and then. Seeing his friend's determination, Hitoya makes a definitive decision and channels all his remaining power. He vows to put a definitive end to that hellish hunt and unleashes the most powerful attack of his life. The boy executes a perfect spinning motion, delivering a precise curved cut to the great dragon's collar. With a thunderous sound, the red ring of subjugation shatters into 1,000 pieces, freeing the creature. Without magical control, the great monster shakes violently, knocking the cruel Alvara off its back. The colossal dragon lands firmly on the ground, free from the terrible influence that had dominated all its actions. Disarmed, the guild leader falls headfirst to the ground, unable to regain his balance. The red marks of the control pact on his hand begin to crack and disappear instantly. The hunter freezes in terror upon realizing that a mere monster was capable of breaking his leash of absolute control. He points out that breaking that ring of submission created by humans should theoretically be impossible. However, the young skeleton advanced, focused on the weak point, and shattered the object without hesitation. The warrior wonders in panic who that mysterious creature really is that commands that dungeon. Even gravely wounded, Alvara rises with the last of his strength and channels an immense murderous aura. Completely insane, The villain shouts that he won't leave anything behind and that he's going to destroy the entire dungeon. He unleashes a desperate blow with his magic weapon, attempting to destroy everything around him. Unfortunately for him, the metal blade of his great sword begins to crack completely due to the excess energy. Hitoya appears, floating majestically above him, enveloped in a radiant and powerful blue dungeon boss aura. The young man remembers his dear friends and reaffirms his eternal promise to protect all the local monsters. With a relentless and very serious look, the boy warns the hunter that the battle ends right now. The boy leaps forward in the blink of an eye and lands the decisive blow that cuts through the fearsome leader's last defenses. A gigantic explosion of bluish light purifies the entire dungeon area, eliminating the presence of the invaders. Gradually, the smoke dissipates, and the sun's rays once again illuminate the peaceful forest of the F-level dungeon. Hitoya sits wearily on the grass and breathes a sigh of relief beside the two-headed dragons who are also resting. Lying fallen and defeated on the ground, Alvara stares at the monsters with intense hatred, calling them all insignificant trash. He grits his teeth in anger and roars furiously, demanding that the beasts not dare look at him with disdain. Suddenly, the immense silhouette of the two-headed dragon looms menacingly over the villain's body. The great beast stared at its former oppressor with a serious look, remembering all the suffering it had caused. The dragon confesses that he spent a long time imprisoned, too weak to fight back against the chains that subjugated him. The beast opens its jaws, determined to take responsibility and put a definitive end to its former master. The hunter begins to scream in sheer despair and panic as he realizes his own monster is about to devour him right there. With a final cry of hatred directed towards the heavens, the villain curses all the monsters before disappearing. The system screen glows gold, confirming that the official number of intruders on the premises has now dropped to 0. Hitoya faces the immense, freed dragon and silently celebrates the end of that terrible battle against the invaders. A blue notification appears on the screen, offering the option to recruit the enormous level 71 dragon. Hitoya gazes calmly at the immense creature and ponders what decision to make regarding his future. He explains that he can officially add him to the dungeon and gently asks what the dragon wishes to do. After a long silence, the beast respectfully announces that it prefers to leave that place and continue on its way. The young man accepts the decision with a gentle and understanding smile, fully respecting her desire for freedom. The little dragons question whether he is sure, since it would be a rare opportunity to recruit a strong ally. He counters by saying that he doesn't want to act like a hunter and forcibly capture a creature that has already suffered so much. The boy cheerfully adds that the dragon certainly has its own goals in the outside world. The creature gazes at the boy with gratitude, revealing that it will now leave, focused on saving its imprisoned companions. He is referring to the other innocent monsters who remain enslaved in iron cages by the guild. The beast bitterly confesses that in the past it served only as a terrible tool in the hands of the organization. But now, like a proud dragon, he vows to redeem his mistakes and truly fight to right his past. The colossal dragon opens its immense black wings, preparing to take flight towards the open horizon. He bids farewell respectfully, thanking the young man and the little dragons for restoring his dignity. The majestic creature soars high and crosses the skies of the dungeon, definitively setting off on its new journey. His final words of gratitude echo from afar as his silhouette disappears into the greenish clouds of the dungeon. The little dragons watched the departure in silence, quietly commenting on how the immense beast was finally gone. The young boss breaks into a beautiful, satisfied smile, having made the right choice for the creature's fate. He turns to the little dragons and asks affectionately if they too would like to return to the outside world. They sweetly admit that the dungeon is rather strange, but snuggle into their savior's lap. They happily confess that they really like it there, and remember that the boy had asked their names before. The two heads officially introduce themselves, proudly revealing their names to be Atta and Yatta, respectively. Hitoya lets out a contagious laugh of pure happiness and thanks them from the bottom of his heart for trusting him with their names. Suddenly, the dungeon system begins to glow intensely in a golden color, initiating the evolution process. The holographic screen indicates that the former Level F Forest Mausoleum is ready for its grand transition. The system officially confirms that all minimum requirements for territorial development have been met. The boy's eyes widen, and he lets out a sound of utter astonishment, not quite understanding the changes that are occurring. The blinding light fills the entire cave, announcing the leveling up and classification of the dungeon. A mysterious message on the control panel warns that an ancient and powerful entity has just been defeated in the world. An immense wave of power reconstructs the entire environment, generating large columns of golden energy in the forest. The evolution is successfully completed, officially promoting the territory to an E-level dungeon. Hitoya and the little dragons observe their surroundings in surprise, noticing that the ground has begun to change. The terrain and rock walls shift in fantastic ways, opening up new paths never before explored. Several stone blocks slide across the bottom, revealing a huge passage that had been sealed for a long time. The boy tries to understand the workings behind that evolution and stares at the new area with great curiosity. Suddenly, a cute little wolf cub tumbles down from the dungeon ceiling, letting out a sharp, startled yelp. The boy holds the puppy very carefully and asks, relieved, if it was hurt in that sudden fall. The little animal wags its tail and begins to bark desperately, trying to explain something important to its master. The young man scratches his head, admitting that he doesn't yet speak the language of wolves. But he knows the matter is very serious. The little wolf leaps up and runs towards the bushes, gesturing for the boy to follow him into the forest. Hitoya stares at the determined path, knowing that the puppy's restlessness surely indicates a crucial secret. He commands his allies and decides to venture deeper into the newly revealed forest of the area. The group walks through the bushes, and their eyes widen as they are confronted with a completely unbelievable scene ahead. The boy is speechless when he notices that all the glowing mushrooms in the dungeon have started walking on their own. The tiny green fungi jump and dance happily across the lawn, revealing their soft, fluffy little bodies. Several blue panels appear, confirming that each of those mushrooms is actually a Level 1 monster. Hitoya lets out a cry of astonishment upon discovering that the decorative mushrooms were real monsters all along. Suddenly he looks back, intrigued, noticing a bright, mysterious glow emanating from near the cave. This is the majestic golden gate that now emits a powerful wave of magical shock throughout its structure. The panel announces that the locks on the secret gate to the unexplored sector have finally been successfully deactivated. The young skeleton is thrilled to discover that the mysterious unexplored sector has finally been opened. He laughs and thanks the little wolf, realizing that was exactly what he was trying to show him. Carrying the cub, the boy walks with the dragons and the mushrooms towards the immense golden portal. The little green mushrooms jump for joy and guide the master through the glowing entrance. He stares at the new cave and asks his friends if they really want him to explore that place. The young man reflects that all the local monsters are on his side and that there is no reason to be afraid to move forward. With a determined look, he believes that exploring the uncharted area might reveal great secrets of the dungeon. The whole group carefully descends a long, ancient stone staircase that leads down into the deep underground. Upon reaching the bottom, they come face to face with a rocky wall and believe they have reached a dead end. However, the boy notices a mound of earth emitting a very curious golden glow right in the middle of the room. The little mushrooms begin to jump with great excitement, happily pointing in that direction. In a bizarre way, the magical fungi transform their soft heads into the perfect shape of digging shovels. They begin digging into the earth with extreme speed, raising dust and surprising the entire group. Hitoya stares at the scene in complete disbelief as he watches the mushrooms digging to help him unearth the item. A beautiful golden chest emerges from the ground, illuminating the entire underground area with the official level-up reward. The system indicates that it is the legendary 6th sacred bow, and the boy deduces that it is a treasure chest. The holographic panel floats, officially confirming that the magnificent ark is indeed your reward. The young skeleton enthusiastically admits that the dungeon really does behave exactly like a game. The little dragons jump for joy with excitement as they enthusiastically repeat the word treasure, non-stop. They begin to theorize whether more rare chests will appear if the dungeon continues to rise in rank. However, Hitoya anxiously points out that the presence of valuable treasures will surely attract many more hunters from elsewhere. He fears that new and dangerous elite adventurers will decide to invade the dungeon, focused on stealing the Ark. The dragons advise thinking about it later and curiously ask what might be hidden inside the chest. The boy asks his little friends to step back a little to ensure their safety in case there are any traps. The young skeleton cautiously approaches the chest of gold and wonders, intrigued, what might be inside. The moment he touches the lid of the Ark, a colossal beam of golden energy explodes across the scene. The system screen reveals that the acquired item is called the legendary and mysterious Right Hand of Prometheus. Hitoya holds the beautiful golden artifact, noticing that its shape closely resembles that of a mystical ring. The holographic panel confirms that the ring is a mystical object and possesses a powerful hidden effect. The young man gets a tremendous fright and shouts in surprise when he reads the specifications for the IB, Accessories Special Effect. He grits his teeth in astonishment and breaks out in a cold sweat at the sheer absurd potential of that power. The little creatures stare at him curiously and ask if the effect grants some incredible combat ability. The boy admits that the technique is indeed very useful, but he keeps the ring with a rather worried expression. He fears that using this power could trigger major battles and endanger the lives of all his friends. The boy apologizes to the dragons and gently informs them that he prefers not to reveal the secret of that ring for now. The young man thoughtfully concludes that there are far too many mysteries surrounding the relics hidden in that dungeon. He recalls his own evolution and the unusual fact that he managed to break Alvara's ring of subjugation. Hitoya stares at his reflection and deeply questions who he has truly become in this new world. He tries to devise a clever strategy to protect the dungeon without having to use the ring's dangerous power. Suddenly, the young man breaks into a beautiful, determined smile and tells the mushrooms that he will need everyone's help. The little green fungi tilt their heads and stare at him with an extremely confused and cute expression. Hitoya remembers how easily they could dig and realizes he can use that strength to alter the dungeon. He enthusiastically suggests that everyone work as a team to build a secret hideout in the forest. The whole gang starts digging into the ground in a very fun way, joining forces with all the local monsters. Flying dragons carry the stones, helping to pile up the rocky debris that emerged with evolution. Next, they cover the entire structure with dense branches and foliage to perfectly camouflage the location. Hitoya gazed at the final result, his cheeks flushed and a smile of immense satisfaction on his face. The secret hideout is ready, revealing a beautiful cabin built inside a gigantic tree. The system updates the map, showing the camouflaged main entrance and the new, fully secure secret sector. The young man joyfully thanks everyone for their help, celebrating peace and the beginning of his new life with his friends. The little dragons ask if they can come inside the house soon, and Hitoya very happily confirms that they can. He explains that being protected by earth and stone beneath the roots will keep them completely safe from external attacks. The young man proudly points to a small passage in the back that serves as a secret emergency escape route. The interior of the new hideout is a little dark and cool, but it exudes a comforting energy for everyone. The whole group settles down on the cave floor, admitting that the place is indeed extremely cozy. Hitoya pets the little wolf and wishes everyone a good night's sleep, assuring them that everyone will be safe there. Looking around, the young chief smiles, seeing that all the local little monsters have already fallen into a deep sleep. He reflects that despite the concerns, he feels the dungeon's evolution serves to create a true home. The young man recalls how climbing the social ladder in his former human world was synonymous with unfair and endless competition. However, he realizes that leveling up the dungeon in that new world seems to be a very different process. He understands that the increase in his physical power serves specifically to make him a stronger warrior. And best of all, this new fighting force allows you to defend and protect each of your dear friends. He decides that the best course of action now is to return to the dungeon entrance to continue his watchful vigil. One of their little dragons stirs gently in the cave, maintaining a calm and peaceful expression as it sleeps. Outside, Hitoya checks the secret escape route and sighs with relief to see that everything is in perfect order. Nearby, some sharp, blue claws lightly touch the clear surface of a small lake in the forest. The boy turns around curiously when he notices the two-headed dragons standing thoughtfully near the bank. Ata and Yata seem a little restless, watching the reflection of the water under the soft light, filtering through the foliage. The skeleton gently asks what's wrong when it notices that one of the heads seems a little anxious. The beast stared intently at the young chief, its beautiful blue eyes gleaming in the dim light of the forest. The creature curiously questions why the young skeleton is trying so hard to protect the monsters. She insists on asking who the boy really is, and the boy is completely taken aback by the direct question. The two heads say they want to get to know him better, and curiously ask if he has any kind of family. They question whether his relatives are also monsters like him, leaving the young man thoughtful with the memory. The boy becomes slightly embarrassed and scratches his head, trying to come up with the best answer to that question. He subtly reveals that his parents were normal humans, despite him now being a skeleton monster. The boy closes his eyes and begins to recall his first and oldest memory of his past life on Earth. He remembers being an abandoned orphan, freezing and hungry in the middle of a terrible winter night. But his life changed completely the day a human couple lovingly reached out to adopt him. His new adoptive parents always reassured him, guaranteeing that he would be completely safe by their side. The little boy cried tears of pure emotion and happiness as he officially called them Mom and Dad for the first time. Even without knowing his origins, that human couple welcomed him with all the love in the world into their new home. Unfortunately, a terrible and devastating natural disaster struck the city suddenly, changing everything. Their old house was completely buried under the rubble, and their beloved adoptive parents never returned. Hitoya explains to the monsters that although they don't physically resemble each other, the generous way they lived changed them. The young man confesses that since that tragic day, he has always maintained the desire to live in the same kind way as they did. He smiles, assuring everyone that he wants to dedicate his life to welcoming and protecting those who most need a safe home there. The little wolf is moved by the story and rubs affectionately against the boy, who thanks his companion for his support. The little dragons gaze at the boy with eyes shining with admiration as they discover his beautiful and sad story. They admit that there are still many mysteries surrounding his powers, but they perfectly understand why he is there. Far away on the outskirts of the large and bustling capital city, the sun's rays begin to set on the horizon. The immense underground research laboratory for the eastern sector of the capital is located within the inner district. A man reads a report about the F-level dungeon and comments, intrigued, on the order to destroy the place forever. Lying relaxed, the blonde scientist smiles as he reads the extermination request sent by the officers. The mysterious researcher displays an intrigued smile, finding this mission an excellent surprise for his day. He puts on his scientist's lab coat, commenting that he will make sure to study that dungeon in great detail. Back in the dungeon, the morning sun's rays illuminate the ancient stone structure of the great main gate. Suddenly, a loud, deafening crash reverberates through the stone walls, breaking the silence of the dungeon. Hitoya and his little friends get a terrible fright when they feel the ground shake violently in the cave. The system triggers an urgent red alert of intrusion, confirming the entry of a new group of hunters into the area. The little dragons and the wolf cub are on high alert when they realize that a new hunters' guild has just invaded. With a calm expression, Hitoya tells his friends to stay calm and warns that he will personally stop them. He swears that regardless of who appears, he will fight with all his might to defend his home. The young man leaps from the top of the branch, appearing like a blue flash of lightning right in front of the band of armed knights. The 6 hunters activate their powerful special abilities simultaneously, preparing a combined attack. Hitoya stares at the group and notices with alarm that they all possess abilities, indicating that the average skill level has risen. However, he keeps a cool head and decides to face his opponents strategically and step by step. He activates the fearsome earthquake technique, focused on neutralizing the initial attack of the entire group at once. With his bright blue eyes shining intensely, the boy concentrates an immense wave of magical energy in his feet. He recalls Alvara's power and decides to use that same strength that caused so much pain to defend the monsters. The young man unleashes a brutal seismic shock wave that destroys the floor and causes the entire dungeon ceiling to collapse. The knights are thrown into utter despair upon recognizing Alvara's terrifying technique of mass destruction. One of the leaders yells for everyone to dodge immediately while activating his quick escape ability. A colossal blue explosion of dust and rocks hits the rear of the unsuspecting mercenary band squarely. One of the adventurers runs away terrified, admitting in surprise that the boss's power is absurdly insane. The gang flees in disarray while one of the enemies activates his celestial swimming aerial technique to escape. In a firm tone, Hitoya orders the invaders to turn around and return immediately to their world. The boy coldly threatens that if they take one more step, he will fight with the intent to kill them. The mercenary leader orders the group to retreat immediately and commands the stone gate to be opened quickly. One of them complains that returning empty-handed means not getting paid by the client, but he continues to run away. However, another warrior smiles, showing that he managed to collect the main objective of that invasion. It is a small, floating mechanical fish that emits a mysterious reddish light from its eyes. Hitoya activates his enhanced vision technique and stares at the intrigued group upon noticing the strange mechanical object. He realizes with wide eyes that the metal sea creature is nothing more than a mechanical spy robot. The boy concludes that the band of adventurers did not enter there with the standard objective of closing the dungeon. The immense stone gate slams shut with a bang, sealing the dungeon once more and leaving Hitoya deep in thought. The young skeleton wondered, very worried, what on earth those men were really looking for. Suddenly, the boy is startled to see a huge number of notifications popping up on his system. The holographic panel confirms that he successfully stole and copied 5 new special techniques from the gang. With his 6 new skills at hand, the young man worries about what kind of enemy he will face next. Even though he's tense, he smiles, knowing his arsenal is growing and that he now has many more defensive options. The little dragons fly happily towards him and comment, impressed, that the fight ended in the blink of an eye. The young man gazes at the 2 heads with a beautiful smile and affectionately calls them by their official names again. Suddenly he remembers a very interesting detail about magical techniques and stares at the beasts, intrigued. He tells the little creatures that he wants to test one of the new special abilities he just stole. The boy jumps and activates the celestial swimming technique, managing to float upside down in mid-air. The dragon rejoices upon seeing that its master now also possesses the ability to fly through the skies. However, because he hasn't yet mastered the movement, he ends up losing his balance mid-flight. The skeleton tumbles headfirst into the middle of a forest bush, letting out a funny yelp of surprise. Ata and Yata quickly fly to check on their master and ask worriedly if he is hurt. Stuck upside down on a branch, Hitoya gives an awkward laugh, admitting that practicing the technique is difficult. He tries again, gliding smoothly through the treetops, feeling as if he were swimming in the sky. Excited, the boy asks the flying dragons how old they were when they first learned to use their magic. One of the heads calmly replies, revealing that it has known how to use magic since the moment of its birth. The boy's eyes widened in astonishment, wondering if absolutely all magical creatures are born this way. They explain that this is not the case, and remind them that the little wolf cubs in that forest, for example, were born without any powers. Curious, the boy asks if there are human beings who are also born with the natural gift of using magic. The beasts explain definitively that only the monsters of that world possess the natural gift of those abilities. The young man remembers his promise and thinks of ways to strengthen the dungeon without relying on dangerous artifacts. He finally understands why breaking humans' weapons prevents them from using magical techniques in combat. They explain, horrified, that human weapons are actually created through the processing of monsters. Hitoya's eyes widen, and he becomes completely paralyzed upon understanding the macabre origin of those weapons of combat. He realizes that all the swords and spears he has destroyed so far were once living creatures. A terrible feeling of guilt consumes his chest as he thinks that in a way he ended up destroying other monsters. One of the heads affectionately tells him that he is too sensitive and asks him not to blame himself for it. She explains that the hunters use the magical subjugation collars specifically to capture new materials. The main purpose of the control ring is to enforce obedience and facilitate the transport of creatures to the capital. The beast sadly concludes that human magical items are merely monsters forced to serve even after death. She comforts the boy, saying that breaking those weapons actually means freeing the souls of those monsters once and for all. Hearing those sweet words brought indescribable relief to the soul of the boy who had been feeling quite depressed. He knows the outside world hides terrible tragedies, but he focuses his thoughts on protecting those close to him. He happily soars back to life alongside his loyal companions, focused on ensuring the safety of his beloved home. In the capital's laboratory, the blonde researcher laughs loudly as he confirms that yet another gang has failed to clear the dungeon. Elaine smiled slightly, commenting that she now had an excellent reason to personally enjoy herself in that area. Nearby, Lord Peter snorted wearily, cursing the irritating weakness of those bounty hunters. However, the greedy nobleman grins sadistically and mockingly declares himself a lucky man. He celebrates the fact that the request to destroy the dungeon was accepted by one of the greatest geniuses in the capital. The genius Elaine affectionately pets his little mechanical fish, praising its excellent espionage work. The robotic device emits a strong reddish glow, projecting the captured data directly into the room. The fair-haired scientist confirms with satisfaction that the images of the dungeon were recorded with extreme clarity. The noble lord, completely overcome with cold sweat and speechless, confesses that he has never seen such technology before. He is impressed to see the images of the dungeon in motion with various magic words floating above the screen. The holographic projection displays the face of the young skeleton, finalizing the process of recognizing the new dungeon. Elaine calmly stands up in her white lab coat and warns her allies that their next move is all too obvious. Lord Peter Atlas stares at the scientist with curiosity, sweating profusely, and asks what he really plans to do. In a calm yet determined tone, the researcher reveals that he will conduct a personal field investigation at the site. He promises to meticulously study every inch of that mysterious dungeon before destroying it completely. Back in the dungeon, the young skeleton enjoys flying and playing happily with his loyal little friends in the tree. Suddenly, the system panel starts flashing bright red again, triggering a new urgent intrusion warning. The boy becomes serious and immediately orders the dragons and the wolf cub to run and hide in the safe shelter. Hitoya stared at the dark passage, anxiously wondering what kind of powerful warrior he would face this time. The gigantic stone door of the dungeon cracks slightly and begins to open slowly, accompanied by the system's danger warnings. Hidden behind dense foliage, the boy stares at the dark entrance, trying to make out the silhouettes of the hunters. To their surprise, the main entrance to the cave appears to be completely empty and devoid of any sign of life. The young chief frowns and whispers to himself, puzzled, noticing that there is indeed no one around. He tensely deduces that the enemies are camouflaged when suddenly a mysterious voice echoes very close to his ear. The boy gets a terrible fright from the whisper and quickly jumps back, trying to find the source of the sound. A mysterious human silhouette begins to materialize in mid-air, surrounded by small, glowing bubbles. The fair-haired researcher floats in elegantly and greets his boss with a mocking smile. Hitoya is completely shocked to see that the man simply materialized out of nowhere right in front of him. The boy recoils tensely, noticing that he can't see the status window or the opponent's abilities. He swallows hard and admits to himself that he has never faced a hunter as mysterious and dangerous as this one. With a serious look, Hitoya demands to know the scientist's identity and what he really wants in that dungeon. The researcher jokingly announces that he's there to clean the dungeon and asks where the hidden secret treasure is. Hitoya worriedly recalled that the presence of the chest of gold would surely bring many security problems. He grits his teeth as he confirms with horror that the true objective of that invasion is to steal his treasure. The scientist walks calmly, confirming his goal of stealing the item and achieving the complete destruction of the place. The boy becomes extremely tense upon hearing the term total extermination and stares at the enemy with wide eyes. The villain smiles sadistically and asks if the young boss really doesn't know the rules of that cruel world. Elaine coldly warns that when a dungeon loses its mystical treasure, it simply disappears forever. Elaine coldly explains that when an adventurer manages to get their hands on the hidden treasure of a dungeon, the entire dungeon structure simply collapses, and all the local creatures die and disappear along with it. The scientist smiles sadistically and coldly states that this is exactly how the laws of the world work. Overflowing with fury and with gleaming eyes, Hitoya shouts that he will never allow such a cruel fate to happen. The light-haired researcher is not intimidated and comments, laughing, that he had expected such an aggressive reaction. Elaine moves her fingers, instantly summoning a gigantic flock of small flying robotic fish. The young skeleton gets a tremendous fright when he sees that metallic horde diving towards him to attack him. Upon noticing that his opponent is controlling hundreds of weapons at once, the young man realizes he needs to devise a new tactic. He leaps, activating the curved blade, focused on dodging attacks while attempting to destroy the devices one by one. The scientist merely watches the movement with disdain and comments that he had already predicted each of the boy's dodges. To the boy's dismay, the destroyed metal pieces begin to glow and fuse together again in the air. The small mechanical fish completely rebuild themselves and resume their swift attack against the unsuspecting young man. Hitoya's eyes widened in horror as he realized that his physical blows were causing no real damage to the machines. Elaine scoffs at the situation, asking if the dungeon boss doesn't have an easy time dealing with this type of opponent. The boy despairs, wondering how he will manage to fight an opponent immune to physical blows. Suddenly, one of the small dragons emerges from behind the bushes, opening its jaws to unleash a magical attack. The two-headed beast fires a massive and devastating freezing ray directly at the mysterious scientist. Hitoya stares at the scene in surprise and thanks his friends for their heroic support, having unexpectedly entered the fray. Ata's ice blast strikes the ground with precision, instantly freezing the entire surrounding battlefield. The second dragon also advances, activating its frost technique focused on preventing the enemy from approaching its master. The scientist merely laughs and stares at the two beasts with disdain, remembering that they were the guild's former creatures. Ignoring the taunts, the little monsters continue attacking and unleashing continuous bursts of energy. Elaine performs an impressive acrobatic dodge in mid-air, narrowly escaping the beams of magical light. The little creatures growl furiously when they see that the blond man is able to dodge the blows with such ease. He hovers calmly in the dungeon sky, demonstrating that he has absolute control over his flight movements. The scientist observes the animals very closely and notices, intrigued, that they are not wearing their control collars. His eyes widened in surprise, and he silently wondered how those creatures had managed to break the chains. Elaine lands calmly on the ground and asks mockingly how the escaped beasts managed to remove the rings of subjugation. Ata and Yata take a step back, flapping their wings furiously, categorically refusing to give any answer to their rival. The scientist smiles slightly, commenting that they don't seem to be in the mood to talk to him that day. Suddenly, he gets a tremendous fright when he feels an immense wave of magical energy advancing from behind him. Hitoya emerges from the shadows, activating his invisible attack technique with eyes glowing a sky blue. The scientist performs a quick jump backward, admitting with amazement that the boy truly possesses dangerous abilities. The young skeleton stands in front of the little dragons and angrily orders the man to stay away from his friends. Elaine calmly adjusts her sunglasses and decides that today's fun hunt was enough. He activates his teleportation portal and bids farewell to the young man, mockingly warning that they will see each other very soon. The scientist vanishes completely into thin air, while the system screen confirms that there are no more intruders there. The boy becomes extremely intrigued when he realizes that no notifications of newly stolen abilities have appeared on the screen. A red message flashes in the air, warning that there is absolutely no technique available for him to copy from there. Hitoya is completely shocked to discover that his power of thievery simply failed against that warrior. He recalls that to level up in the dungeon, he will need to defeat strong enemies and accumulate new techniques. But he understands, alarmingly, that the scientist is a unique adversary and that his information is completely unknown. The young skeleton swallows hard, admitting that the man in the lab coat doesn't resemble any enemy he's ever faced. Far away, in the grand palace of the capital, Elaine gazes at her spy fish and reveals that she has changed her plans regarding the dungeon. Lord Pedro Detlas approaches, curious, and asks, intrigued, if anything went wrong during the mission. The scientist displays a mysterious smile, explaining that he made this decision purely to benefit his personal research. Elaine reveals her terrifying new plan to specifically capture the two-headed dragons that inhabit the dungeon. Lord Pedro loves the idea and asks the scientist to capture the mysterious dungeon master once and for all. Pedro celebrates greedily, eyeing the fortune he will make by selling the boy as a rare commodity on the black market. Elaine coldly accepts the deal, guaranteeing that she will provide as many restraint collars as necessary for the capture. The scientist merely adjusts his hair and arrogantly warns the nobleman not to delay his research plans. Lord Pedro immediately agreed, displaying a flattering smile and clasping his hands in submission. The nobleman assures that his elite henchmen are extremely strong and that their skills are unbeatable. They gaze proudly at the enormous dragon carcasses displayed on the wall as trophies from their cruel hunts. Back in the dungeon, the boy positions himself in front of the golden chest, surrounded by his loyal companions. The boy recalls with seriousness Elaine's words about the terrible consequence of having the treasure stolen from there. If that mysterious gold ring is taken by hunters, the entire dungeon will completely collapse. With a relentless gaze, he concludes that protecting that relic is the only way to guarantee the lives of everyone there. The dungeon's mystical map pinpoints the exact location of the mystical treasure as new threats approach. The silence of the cave is suddenly broken when the system screen flashes bright red again. Hitoya quickly climbs onto a tree branch upon realizing that the new challengers have just crossed the portal. Suddenly, two colossal beams of light and golden energy surge through the portal at high speed, striking the boy. The young boss performs an impressive acrobatic dodge in mid-air, sensing the immense hidden power of that strike. The researcher appears, hovering elegantly in the air with his metallic weapons, and greets the boy mockingly. A furious Hitoya shouts, asking if the researcher really insists on trying to steal the sacred ark from the forest. The scientist retorts, laughing, that his main objective today is to capture a rare sample for his studies. The boy is shocked to realize that one of his small mechanical fish has begun to glow abnormally. The small metal fish expands at a terrifying speed, transforming into a beast of colossal size. The monstrous mechanical fish dives with its mouth open toward the young boss, intent on swallowing him whole in one gulp. The boy is enveloped by a bright, circular force field and realizes in terror that he is completely trapped. Elaine smiles, displaying a red collar, and arrogantly asks where the little dragons are hiding. Trapped within the energy barrier, Hitoya stares at the subjugation ring and feels an immense fury consume his chest. He recalls with great hatred how those cursed collars were used to enslave and torture the creatures of the forest. The young man mentally vows that he will give his own life, but he will never let any of his friends go through that pain. He activates his powerful wind blade technique, focusing on shattering the barrier that had him trapped. Meanwhile, deep within the forest of the Level E dungeon, a mysterious dark silhouette emerges from the tunnel. A hunter wielding a colossal spear cuts a path through the bushes, confirming that the Lord's plan is proceeding perfectly. The armored soldier recalls that while the genius Elaine lures the dungeon boss, he must act stealthily. Their objective is to hastily infiltrate the sanctuary to steal the sacred treasure without being detected by any creature. He gives a malicious, clenched-toothed smile, fully confident in the success of that invasion strategy. Back in their hiding place, the little ears of one of the wolf cubs twitch as it detects a strange noise coming from outside. The cub approaches the entrance to the shelter hidden beneath the roots and stares into the darkness of the forest with great distrust. He sniffs the air intently, sensing a completely unknown and menacing odor lurking around the boundaries of his home. The little wolf cub glances sideways at the spear hunter, who walks stealthily towards the dungeon sanctuary. The cub's eyes widen in fright as it realizes that a new and dangerous human enemy has managed to infiltrate the area. He begins to tremble with fear when he realizes he is alone with the other puppies and that his master is not around. The little animal closes its eyes in great agony, trying to stifle its cries so as not to reveal its exact location. He remembers Hitoya's oath to protect the mystical relic with his own life and makes a courageous decision. The puppy stamps its paw forcefully on the damp earth, filling its small chest with all the courage of a warrior. The little wolf cub roars with determination, leading the pack of pups out of the shelter, focused on defending the Ark. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, the force barrier that held Hitoya captive shatters completely under the impact of the blow. The young skeleton breaks free with an incredible acrobatic leap, destroying the metal fish that was trying to contain him. Elaine stares at the boy with a serious look and coldly warns that she will need to use even harsher methods to arrest him. The scientist commands a massive swarm of golden mechanical projectiles that advance at absurd speed toward the boy. Hitoya expertly dodges attacks and furiously vows to destroy every ring of subjugation he finds in the world. Elaine laughs mockingly, pointing out that it's biologically impossible for a simple monster to break a ring made by humans. The boy retorted, shouting that he had broken the dragon's rings before and that he would prove their rules wrong. The young skeleton explains through clenched teeth that he acted purely because he could no longer bear to see the beasts suffering. The fair-haired researcher stares at the young man silently and thoughtfully, showing surprise at the revelation. He stares at his own fist and asks, puzzled, if the boy was really able to break the necklace with his bare hands. Elaine becomes pensive as he reflects on that bizarre dungeon and the mysterious boss capable of breaking the rings of subjugation, something totally unprecedented in history. The researcher realizes that his true target from the beginning should have been the dungeon master himself, and not the two-headed dragon. Meanwhile, Hitoya advances towards his opponent and indignantly questions how anyone could have the audacity to use such a cruel object. He explains furiously that the collar is not a simple accessory, but a terrible device designed to enslave the bodies and hearts of monsters. The young skeleton demonstrates unwavering determination as he focuses his magical energy into combat. Observing everything from afar, Elaine murmurs to himself that he perfectly understands the boy's anger. With an enigmatic smile on his face, the scientist admits that he understands very well the motives that guide his boss's actions. Suddenly, the desperate howl of the little wolf cub echoes through the silent forest, shattering the tranquility of the place. Hearing the cub's cry for help, Hitoya goes on high alert and looks back in utter shock. He panics when he realizes that something very serious has just happened to his little friends deep in the woods. Elaine floats up and asks mockingly if the young chief is really going to run to save the little wolf. Hitoya becomes completely tense and sweats profusely, unsure whether to focus on the scientist or rush to help his companion. In the end, the boy decides to ignore the researcher and speeds away, knowing that keeping everyone safe is his top priority. Elaine watches the escape in silence, extremely pleased to have finally found a power capable of shattering the control rings. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the forest, the wolf cub runs desperately, letting out sharp howls of pure terror. The small animal tries to escape as quickly as possible, while a terrifying and menacing magical shadow pursues it closely. An arrogant warrior appears with a sadistic grin on his face, mocking the keen sense of smell of that fragile creature. This refers to the dangerous level 61 lancer named Ronsolo Lopez, who plans to test his new weapon against the cub. The poor little wolf trembles with terror and cries as he sees the hunter's enormous spear pointed directly at his head. However, before the fatal blow can strike the cub, Hitoya appears like lightning and intercepts the spear attack with his body. The young chief glared at the hunter with fury, realizing that yet another heartless invader had managed to infiltrate the dungeon. He positions himself like a protective shield over the wolf cub and firmly orders the intruder to move away from the animal. Ronsolo Lopez's grin frenzied as he recognized the dungeon boss, and he immediately activated his special combat ability. Hitoya yells for the little wolf to run away while nimbly dodging the enemy's first swift spear thrusts. A colossal explosion of magical energy occurs in the middle of the scene as the forces of the two warriors clash. The boy performs impressive aerial dodges, trying to find an opening to counterattack the skilled lancer. He anxiously realizes he can't use his large-scale attacks in the middle of the dense forest for fear of harming the local monsters. Hitoya admits that he is facing an extremely experienced warrior whose spear strikes are incredibly powerful and precise. The two opponents face each other in the middle of the clearing, keeping their guard up for any surprise move. The young skeleton stared intently at the tip of his rival's weapon, feeling an extremely strange sensation emanating from it. The tip of the spear begins to emit a thick, dark smoke of magical energy that catches the boy's attention. Suddenly, the boy's eyes widened as he remembered seeing that terrifying dark energy emanating from a giant dragon in the past. He recalls with horror that the magical weapons of humans are forged through a cruel process using the bodies of monsters. The young man realizes with profound sadness that the steel of that spear was forged from the sacrifice of an innocent creature. Hitoya questions in shock whether that cursed spear was forged using the materials of the legendary dragon he had freed. Ronsolo Lopez grins mockingly and asks if the boy was really responsible for releasing that immense beast. The villain proudly displays his weapon and boasts that the spear becomes increasingly powerful as he hunts new monsters. Hitoya is completely paralyzed and horrified upon hearing the cruel account of how that hunting equipment was created. The young man shouts furiously that he never released the dragon only for it to be transformed into such a terrible instrument of death. Ronsolo laughs loudly at the boy's fury and says that hunting monsters for money and power is the greatest thrill of his life. Completely insane, the warrior claims that hunting magical creatures is a pastime that never loses its appeal. Hitoya charges forward and blocks the attack, gripping the spear shaft directly with his hands, startling his opponent. The lancer is completely paralyzed and shocked to see his blow stopped so easily by sheer physical force. He tries to push his weapon away, but realizes that the young skeleton possesses an absolutely incomprehensible physical resistance. Hitoya clenches his fists and recalls with great emotion the great dragon's sincere wish to keep his companion safe. He recalls that destroying the hunter's weapons is the only way to free the imprisoned souls of those defenseless creatures. With his eyes gleaming an intense blue, the boy vows that he will shatter that cursed spear right now. The young boss leaps high into the air and concentrates all his physical power to deliver a crushing punch against his rival's weapon. Ronsolo Lopez grits his teeth in agony as he feels a brutal force strike his spear without the boy even using his skills. The hunter froze in terror as he watched the blade of his powerful mystical spear begin to crack completely under Hitoya's relentless fist. Hitoya leaps away in the air while his opponent tries to recalculate his attack strategy. Ronsolo begins to sweat with pure nervousness as he realizes that failing to clear an E-level dungeon would be an unforgivable shame for his reputation. Completely furious, the warrior decides to turn around and flees at high speed through the deep forest. Hitoya is very surprised to notice the enemy's sudden escape and indignantly questions whether he is really trying to get away from there. The young chief dives swiftly through the trees of the dark forest, closely pursuing the fleeing hunter. He tries to predict where his opponent is running and anxiously wonders what is so dangerous in that direction. Ronsolo's wicked grin blared as he spotted his true target, hidden amidst the dense vegetation. Hitoya panics completely when he notices that the cowardly hunter has located the defenseless little wolf cub in the clearing. The villain raises his powerful spear and declares that he will grow stronger each time he eliminates every creature in that dungeon. Desperate to avert a tragedy, Hitoya yells at the top of his lungs for the wolf cub to run and for them to hide immediately. The little cub lets out a sharp whimper of terror and becomes completely paralyzed before the immense, sharp point of the enemy spear. Suddenly, a mysterious and elegant figure appears, floating calmly in the air, interrupting Ronsolo's cowardly attack. Both the young chief and the hunter's eyes widen in shock as they recognize the unexpected visitor who has just interrupted the fight. Hitoya stares at the newcomer suspiciously, trying to understand what this other powerful challenger intends to do there. Completely insane, Ronsolo decides to attack the new obstacle and charges forward, delivering a devastating spear blow against it. However, Elaine blocks the attack effortlessly, using only one of her gigantic mechanical fish as a protective shield. The fair-haired researcher hovers gracefully in the air surrounded by his flying robotic devices, demonstrating absolute superiority. Hitoya watches the scene confused and wonders why that dangerous scientist chose to protect the wolf cub from the hunter. Furious at the untimely interference, Ronsolo demands to know why the scientist decided to stand in his way right now. The hunter firmly believes that simply increasing his combat power and eliminating weak monsters is enough to defeat the dungeon boss once and for all. Elaine stares at the warrior with deep disdain and coldly warns him that his actions in that dungeon are nothing but a useless waste of time. The scientist grins provocatively and calmly suggests that the swordsman give up fighting and leave immediately. Feeling utterly humiliated, Ronsolo trembles with rage at being treated as someone inferior to a mere forest monster. Elaine knows very well that a proud warrior would never accept peaceful advice from those without first trying to retaliate by force. The researcher coldly reveals that he intends to use Ronsolo's weakness as a testing tool to further his secret studies. He decides to alter his original conquest plans and focuses entirely on capturing the young chief to use him in his biological research. Beside himself, Ronsolo demands that the scientist retract the insult immediately, but Elaine simply refuses calmly. The villain begins to accumulate an immense amount of dark energy, vowing to transform even his own ally into fuel for his weapon. Hitoya observes the tense conflict of interests between the two human invaders, preparing to react at any moment. Elaine finds the bizarre situation amusing and ironically comments on how the two hunters ended up fighting each other in the middle of the dungeon. With a mocking smile on his face, the researcher turns to the young skeleton and proposes a temporary alliance to fight together. Hitoya is completely perplexed and speechless upon hearing such an absurd partnership suggestion coming from that mysterious man. The scientist warns that the goal of completely destroying the dungeon has been temporarily cancelled, making the atmosphere even more confusing. Protecting the cub, the young leader demands to know the real meaning behind all that crazy charade by the challengers. He tries to figure out if that sudden disagreement between the invaders is real or just a clever trap set for him. Hitoya narrows his eyes, focused on remaining alert for any sign of betrayal coming from either of his opponents. Ronsolo grits his teeth in humiliation upon realizing he is being completely ignored and considered inferior to a low-level boss. The Lancer shouts wildly at the boy and vows to defeat him to prove his true strength once and for all. With a bloodthirsty and deranged look, the hunter advances, launching a desperate frontal attack against the young chief. Suddenly, a gigantic barrier made of dozens of mechanical fish appears to intercept the warrior's violent advance. Elaine executes an elegant arm movement, controlling her metal fish to block Ronsolo's furious charge. The scientist winks in a friendly manner at Hitoya, making the boy even more suspicious of this unexpected help. Completely out of control, the villain activates his special multiplication ability to expand the size of his attacks and destroy everything around him. Sensing the energy emanating from the enemy's attack, Hitoya recognizes with sadness and fury that this technique originally belonged to his great friend, the dragon. Ronsolo laughs like a madman, claiming that his powerful mystical spear will become infinitely stronger after consuming the blood of that monster. The warrior leaps toward the boy and vows angrily that he will make his weapon feed on the boy's blood as well. Hitoya braces himself for the impact of the devastating attack, while the blonde scientist merely floats, observing the unfolding battle. With unwavering determination, The young leader vows that he will not allow the villain to continue desecrating and using the power of his deceased friend. The boy lunges forward and accepts the challenge, leaping directly at the hunter in the middle of the energy storm. A thunderous and violent clash of magical forces explodes in the air as the attacks of the two warriors collide head-on in the middle of the clearing. Hitoya's powerful fist collides head-on with the tip of the enemy spear in a violent clash of magical energy. Ronsolo is horrified to see colossal cracks rapidly spreading across the blade of his mystical weapon. In a fraction of a second, the spearhead shatters completely, leaving the warrior totally unarmed and panicked. Hitoya floats calmly in the air, sadly watching the broken pieces fall to the ground. The boy picks up a small, shiny fragment and deeply laments the cruel fate that the great dragon suffered at the hands of the hunters. Elaine watches the outcome of the confrontation with a very satisfied smile on her researcher's face. Fallen to his knees on the ground, Ronsolo gasps heavily and curses his own weakness in the face of his opponent's immense power. The monster hunter trembles with humiliation as he admits that his precious spear was completely destroyed by a level E dungeon creature. Completely. Desperate after the humiliating defeat, the warrior tries to gather the last of his strength. Suddenly, the warrior rises in a fury and hurls several gleaming rings at the young dungeon chief. Ronsolo madly orders the boy to bow before him as the red rings surge forward, cutting through the air. Hitoya becomes alert when he realizes his opponent has just unleashed the fearsome subjugation rings against him. Completely out of his mind, the villain shouts that he will humiliate the boy, tear him in half, and turn him into valuable hunting material. Without showing any fear, the young skeleton channels his blue energy into his fists and prepares to annihilate the attack. With a swift and precise movement, Hitoya destroys all the subjugation rings flying towards him, neutralizing the threat once and for all. The violent impact throws Ronsolo straight to the ground, causing the remnants of his magic to dissipate into the air. The fallen hunter smiles bitterly and, sweating with terror, admits that it is utterly impossible to defeat that mystical creature. Without giving his opponent a chance to recover, Hitoya quickly advances and delivers a devastating punch that ends the fight. Ronsolo Lopez falls completely unconscious and fuming at the base of a tree after receiving the final blow from the young man. Elaine descends gently to the ground and gazes at the immense confines of the dungeon with a rather thoughtful expression. The scientist silently adjusts his purple glasses as he analyzes the outcome of that unbelievable battle. Hitoya cautiously turns to face the researcher, keeping his guard up and his skeletal tail in a defensive position. The scientist praises the boy's impressive strength and celebrates the fact that he actually managed to break the control rings. The young chief stares at the man very seriously and demands to know his true objective in that territory. He remembers that Elaine saved the wolf cub, but he doesn't forget the fact that researchers often use the rings to enslave monsters. The boy questions the scientist about whether his original plan wasn't to completely conquer and destroy that dungeon. Elaine calmly removes her glasses and gently admits that destroying the dungeon was simply her contracted job. The man reveals that he was hired to investigate the area and capture the boss, but insists that his personal interests are quite different. Hitoya listens intently as the researcher prepares to reveal his true purpose there. Elaine places her hand on her chest and solemnly explains the main topic of her scientific research. With a firm movement, the scientist opens the collar of his coat to reveal a terrible secret hidden beneath the garment. He reveals that he has a bright and painful subjugation ring deeply embedded in his own skin on his neck. Hitoya's eyes widened, and he let out a sound of pure astonishment upon witnessing that mark of slavery on a human body. The boy is completely shocked to discover that a monster hunter is also bound by a magical submission collar. He stares at Elaine's glistening neck, unable to comprehend how it ended up on the researcher's body. The young skeleton tries to process the gravity of that frightening discovery about the origin of the magic collars. Elaine explains that his biological father is human and his mother is a monster, making him a hybrid being born from two rival species. He confesses that, although he has the official mission of capturing the boss, he has much stronger personal reasons for not doing so. The scientist reveals that his only true desire in life is to invent an effective method to break free from that cursed ring of control. He gazes at the boy hopefully and warns him that, since Hitoya can destroy the rings, he has no interest whatsoever in destroying that dungeon. The researcher promises to keep things under wraps in the outside world to ensure no one suspects the true progress of the dungeon. Elaine solemnly swears that she will never kill any local monster and that she will not attempt to conquer the dungeon in a hostile manner. The man smiles gently and asks permission to return to the dungeon in the future, solely for the purpose of conducting peaceful investigations. Hitoya remains silent, staring intently at the scientist as he ponders the level of trust he can place in him. The boy deduces that the scientist fears the cruel hunters and would be willing to do anything to free himself from his own enslavement. In reality, Elaine secretly plans to gain the boy's trust so she can later use him as raw material in creating a weapon that will break her ring. Suddenly, the little dragon Atta emerges, flying from the treetops, letting out an extremely fierce, warning screech. The small animal warns in terror that Elaine is the same man who attacked his companion Yatta in the past and calls him a dangerous enemy. The scientist takes a step back and sincerely apologizes to the little dragons for the misunderstanding that occurred on their first mission. The researcher begins to float towards the portal and says with a smile that he hopes their next encounter will be far less violent. As he silently walks away into the woods, Elaine. Turin mentally celebrates having finally found a way to break his terrible ring of subjugation. The researcher focuses his thoughts on devising a clever trap to catch the young skeleton off guard at their next encounter. Atta flies alongside Hitoya and asks, quite indignantly, if he really thinks it's right to let that intruder go so easily. The young man becomes very thoughtful and sweats profusely, questioning whether he actually made the right decision in allowing the scientist to return to the outside world. He recalls the man's sad words about his hybrid origin, being the product of a forbidden union between a human and a monster. Hitoya gazed thoughtfully at the horizon with a serious look, feeling the weight of the revelations he had just heard about that cruel world. He wonders if there are many other hybrid beings suffering from the mark of slavery in territories dominated by humans. The young man recalls the scientist's solemn response, confirming that the pain of subjugation extends to many other innocent people out there. He recalls with horror the image of dark laboratories where hybrid creatures were artificially created to be enslaved by the guild. Hitoya is deeply shocked to understand the sad and revolting reality that the monsters face far from the dungeon. The boy watches the scientist's silhouette fading into the darkness and wonders if the human world hides so many injustices. Suddenly, the young skeleton takes a firm stance and shouts, asking Elaine Turin to wait just a moment longer. With a painful metallic snap, Hitoya begins to tear a piece of his own tailbone structure away. The boy's mouth gasped heavily as he felt the excruciating pain of that voluntary physical sacrifice. Both the scientist and the little dragon turned around quickly and were completely paralyzed with shock at the bizarre scene. Hitoya pulls with all his determination and breaks a sharp thorn from his own gleaming bones. The boy extends his arm, trembling with pain, and offers the fragment as the material the researcher had been searching for. He lets out a low groan, trying to contain the physical suffering that is consuming his entire chest at that moment. The young man stands firmly in the clearing under the astonished gazes of his loyal forest companions. With a gentle and very generous smile, Hitoya extends his hands, offering the relic, and instructs the scientist to use it in his experiments. Elaine Turin is completely speechless and sweating profusely, unable to understand why the boy so spontaneously donated part of his tail. The young leader explains that he wants to help other enslaved people in the outside world who also need this power of liberation. The scientist stares at the skeleton in absolute silence, deeply touched by the unusual kindness of that mysterious guardian of monsters. The boy shrugs casually, commenting that the injustice with the collars simply bothered him too much to ignore. With eyes shining in a friendly light, the boy confesses that he simply didn't want to pretend he hadn't seen the man's suffering. The young man places the glistening bone fragment directly into the trembling hands of the researcher in the white lab coat. Elaine Turin stares at the relic in his palm, his eyes wide, feeling an overwhelming emotion wash over him. The scientist smiles sincerely and emotionally, demonstrating immense gratitude for having received the support he so desperately sought. Hitoya's beautiful, radiant smile breaks into a beaming grin of pure satisfaction as he realizes he was able to help his new companion take his first step. Observing the friendly scene from afar, Ada makes a rather sulky pout, showing that he still hasn't accepted the intruder's friendship. The little dragon cautiously warns that she still doesn't trust the scientist, and Hitoya replies with a laugh that it's okay for her to feel that way. Ada sighs, calling his master naive and too docile, while the boy lets out a contagious laugh of pure amusement. Floating with his robotic fish around the gleaming bone, Aline Turin begins the preliminary analysis of that powerful mystical component. The scientist gazes at the relic, amazed to find that such a generous and extraordinary creature truly inhabits that world. As a way of showing his gratitude, the man decides to reveal a fascinating secret about why that dungeon is considered unpredictable. He details that, although the dungeon has risen to level E, there are records of only 7 dungeons that have managed to rise in rank throughout history. Aline Turin projects a floating screen in his hand and explains that the minimum achievement level varies according to the dungeon rank. The panel identifies the scientist as the powerful level 89 mage Aline Turin, detailing the strict rules of the entry system. Hitoya scratches his head, quite intrigued by the technical explanation, and asks curiously what it actually means in practice. The wizard explains in detail that warriors of levels lower than those required by the ranking system are barred from entering the dungeon. A hologram of an immense stone tower illustrates adventurers of inadequate level being prevented from crossing the main portal. Aline Turin further reveals that the mythical SSS ranking requires the absurd level of 999, something no warrior has ever achieved. Hitoya and the little monsters are speechless when they discover that no one in the history of humankind has managed to challenge an SSS-ranked dungeon. The scientist concludes that if the dungeon continues to level up and reaches the maximum SSS rating, it will become an absolutely unbeatable dungeon. The boy's eyes widened in astonishment at the thought of transforming his small home into a completely impenetrable fortress. Aline Turin earnestly warns that ranking up will also attract infinitely stronger enemies, making daily combat much more difficult. Before they could continue their conversation, a gigantic explosion of golden light suddenly erupted in the middle of the forest clearing. A large system message floats flashing in the air announcing that the rank-up process restart has been successfully initiated. Hitoya and Ada gasp in astonishment and cover their faces as they witness the immense storm of mystical energy engulfing the ground. The immense stone gate of the dungeon cracks and begins to emit a colossal golden glow, initiating yet another glorious territorial expansion. Aline Turin shields his eyes from the intense golden light and is impressed to witness the actual workings of the ranking system. The wizard's eyes widened as he noticed an unusual and fantastical change occurring in the dungeon's sky. Hitoya stares at the forest ceiling, quite confused, and asks the scientist what that large, shining structure could be. The young skeleton is completely speechless as he contemplates the immense magical energy that begins to concentrate above them. A majestic and colossal golden door appears floating among the treetops of the deep forest. The boy couldn't hide his astonishment at the immense golden portal that had materialized directly on the ceiling. Hitoya points upwards in complete disbelief and wonders what kind of mystical secret that door hides. A system notification appears in the air confirming that this is an unexplored area and that the large portal remains completely locked. The magnificent golden structure floats majestically, emanating a divine aura throughout the subterranean cave. Turin calmly explains that behind that immense locked door must be hidden a valuable mystical treasure of the dungeon. Both the boy and the little dragon jump in fright and repeat the word treasure in surprise, unable to believe what they heard. The wizard explains that high-ranked dungeons are naturally difficult to conquer because of their internal defense rules. He explains that one of the main reasons adventurers fail in their incursions is the massive amount of treasure that exists. The young skeleton scratches his head, puzzled, not understanding the connection between the number of relics and the difficulty of the location. Turin adds that to fully conquer a dungeon, Adventurers are required to steal each of the treasures hidden within. He gleefully adds that the more treasure the dungeon contains, the lower the risk of it collapsing, which is extremely advantageous for their safety. Suddenly, a bright golden glow emanating from the portal draws the attention of the entire group at once. The system panel flashes on the screen, revealing that the only requirement to open that gate is to achieve rank A. Hitoya is shocked when he reads the warning and realizes with horror that he will need to raise the dungeon level by 4 stages to unlock the passage. The boy desperately calculates that he will need to upgrade his home from level E straight to level A, a seemingly impossible journey. The Forest Mausoleum system begins calculating the number of hunters who need to fail in the dungeon for evolution to begin. Turin rests his hand on his chin thoughtfully and asks curiously what the exact number of defeated invaders would be to reach rank A. The wizard recalls his memories, detailing the number of failed conquests in 3 other legendary dungeons from history. The scientist calmly calculates that they will need to defeat the staggering number of approximately 10,000 human hunters. Atta looked at the master worriedly, noting that facing 10,000 strong opponents could take many years of exhausting battles. Turin agrees with the little dragon's concern and admits that reaching rank A in a suit will be a very long and exhausting journey. He recalls that in the outside world, humans hold an overwhelming advantage over all the monsters that inhabit the earth. The scientist concludes that the current reality is completely unfair and cruel to the defenseless magical creatures who are unable to defend themselves. Hitoya lowers his head with a very sad expression as he remembers all the suffering his monster friends went through. The young man reflects with concern that he has only faced a few dozen adventurers and that 10,000 seems like an absurdly impossible number. However, he remembers his oath to protect everyone and vows mentally that he will never let any of his friends suffer in that place again. The boy's determined smile spreads across his face as he imagines all the monsters living happily and safely within the security of their dungeon. Hitoya decides to push away despair and focuses on doing whatever it takes to build a peaceful future for his new family. The young skeleton stands imposingly before the scientist, its eyes displaying an absolutely unwavering determination. Turin gazes at the boy with admiration, noticing that he continues walking firmly forward, undeterred by the despair of reality. The wizard's intelligent gaze gleams as he understands that this young skeleton possesses the soul of a true protective leader. The scientist concludes with a smile that, although climbing the ranks seems difficult, it is undoubtedly the shortest path to achieving eternal freedom. Turin decides to begin preparations and summons his metal fish to retrieve Ronsolo's unconscious body. The mechanical devices suspend the defeated hunter in the air under Hitoya's watchful and satisfied gaze. The wizard amicably assures them that he will keep his promise and order the immediate withdrawal of the official request to conquer the dungeon. With a heart full of hope, Hitoya places his hand on his chest and smiles brightly, grateful for the essential help of his new ally. A week passes in the outside world, and a man slams his fist on the desk in a luxurious office in the capital city. The greedy Ronsolo Lopez rages furiously at being treated like a failed hunter who lost in a low-ranked dungeon. Lord Pedro Detlas tries to calm his business partner by asking for patience and offering him a drink to relax. Beside himself, the Lancer shouts that he wants immediate financial compensation and demands the complete restoration of his wounded professional honor. The villain displays a greedy grin and suggests devising a new and dangerous secret strategy to get what he wants. Pedro Detlas calmly pours a glass of wine, paying little attention to his business partner's hysterical shouts. The nobleman hands over the full goblet with a sadistic smirk and asks the Lancer to detail his financial demands. He ironically vows to do everything to restore the dignity and professional honor of the defeated hunter. The two seal their sadistic agreement by toasting with their glasses of wine, unaware that Hitoya is growing stronger and more prepared to defend them. Seated in his armchair, Ronsolo Lopez calmly sips his glass of wine while plotting his terrible return. The hunter vows to use the extra money to buy new weapons and bring down the entire ecosystem of that dungeon once and for all. He displays a diabolical and sadistic smile as he imagines the complete destruction of the forest and all the little wolf cubs that live there. Suddenly, the cup slips from the warrior's trembling hands and falls directly onto the luxurious carpet, spilling the red liquid. The Lancer's eyes widened, and he began to sweat profusely as he felt a terrible, agonizing, burning sensation take hold of his throat. Ronsolo collapses to his knees, clutching his neck in despair as he realizes he has been brutally betrayed by his ally. Pedro Detlus grins terribly sadistically, and coldly remarks that this painful death will prevent the hunter from living in the shame of failure. The warrior tries to stammer something, blood dripping from his lips, but realizes that his contractor's betrayal is final. Ronsolo Lopez falls lifeless into a pool of blood, his terrible journey tragically brought to a close. Pedro simply wipes his mouth carelessly and complains disdainfully about how that new poison stains his office carpet. However, the Lord froze in terror upon hearing a cold voice from behind, revealing that the entire bloody scene had been duly witnessed. He turns around quickly and comes face to face with Alain Turin, who observes the murder with an extremely calm expression. The powerful wizard flashes a wry smile and asks if the nobleman would also like to have a friendly chat about business right then. Pedro Detlus tries to hide his panic and cynically apologizes for having exposed such an ugly scene of rebel elimination. The nobleman justifies the act by claiming that getting rid of useless and weak warriors is perfectly common in the politics of the capital. Turin agrees mockingly and ironically, maintaining a calm smile as he plans to corner the corrupt man once and for all. Sweating profusely and trying to maintain an air of superiority, Pedro questions what the scientist really wants to discuss with him there. The wizard focuses his menacing gaze from behind his glasses and states categorically that the nobleman is hiding a colossal amount of tax fraud from the capital. The Lord tries to feign dementia and denies the accusations with a nervous laugh, but the researcher proves to be fully prepared to expose him. Turin flashes a confident smile before beginning the process of revealing all of the politician's hidden crimes. He meticulously details thousands of overlooked drug trafficker arrests and exposes the billions of dollars in bribes the nobleman illegally amassed. Pedro turns completely pale and horrified when he realizes that all his biggest secrets of corruption have been discovered. He panics completely when he realizes that the hundreds of accounting books he carefully forged over 30 years have been deciphered by the scientist. Trembling with fear, the corrupt nobleman stammers and claims it's impossible that someone from outside the capital could have discovered all this so quickly. Turin calmly explains that he possesses an extraordinary ability that prevents him from forgetting any detail he sees, hears, or feels. The mage officially activates his powerful innate technique called perfect memory, causing his eyes to glow a sky blue. Pedro Detlus despairs upon discovering that the bespectacled scientist possesses a monstrous intellect capable of memorizing data on a surreal scale. The researcher delivers an official notice from the world government declaring that the nobleman has been discarded and is no longer of use to the capital. He explains coldly that the capital simply loves to purge corrupt allies who begin to fail in their political obligations. The official dismissal notice, stained with blood, falls onto the carpet of Pedro's office, sealing the villain's fate. Turin observes the kneeling nobleman's despair and states that this is the world government's ruthless method for restoring order to the capital. Meanwhile, the starry and peaceful night falls upon the mysterious ruins of the forest mausoleum beneath the stillness of the dungeon. Deep inside the cave, Hitoya is harshly reprimanded by the local monsters for taking such a dangerous action against himself. Atta roars angrily and firmly orders the boy never again to dare tear pieces off his own skeletal body to give to the hunters. The young skeleton bows in a very cute way, sincerely apologizing for having worried the whole group of monsters so much. The other dragon finds the scene curious and comments, laughing, that it's the first time he's seen his companion show so much concern for another person. Atta blushed intensely with embarrassment and loudly denied that she was truly concerned about the safety of that stubborn skeleton. Local creatures find the dragon's shyness amusing and rejoice to see that everyone in the dungeon gets along so well. Smiling amicably, Hitoya calms the wolves' mess and decides it's time to intelligently plan the group's next move. The young man excitedly reveals that the main goal from now on is to raise the territory's ranking until it reaches the legendary SSS classification. He thoughtfully explains that to achieve this great level advancement, they will need to make at least 10,000 hunters fail in their raids. Ada observes the master very attentively, listening carefully to every detail of the new rules for the evolution of the territorial system. The boy ponders that the condition for human success in a dungeon consists specifically of stealing treasures and managing to escape alive. On the other hand, the invader's failure consists of fleeing the dungeon without obtaining any relics or simply dying within the territory. Hitoya sighs with immense relief upon realizing that he won't need to take the lives of 10,000 human adventurers to achieve his goal of evolution. Ada grumbles, pointing out that, despite everything, making 10,000 invaders fail in the dungeon will certainly take a lot of work. The young chief agrees cautiously, knowing that the longer it takes, the greater the chances of some elite group finally looting the place. He gazes at the dungeon's golden treasures and admits to himself that this mysterious world behaves exactly like a role-playing video game. Seated in a lotus position surrounded by his loyal wolf cubs, Hitoya tries to understand the workings of all his magical mechanics. The young skeleton gazes intently at the horizon, his eyes gleaming, determined to unravel every last mystery that governs the laws of that fantastical world. Hitoya plans to question the friendly scientist about all the mysteries of that world the next time he returns to visit them. Meanwhile, Alain Turin travels silently on the back of a mechanical whale under the starry sky of the outside world. The wizard reflects with satisfaction that the dangerous lord of the eastern capital has been defeated, and that he has finally managed to cancel the official request to invade the dungeon. He stares intently into the darkness of the night, knowing that things outside the forest are about to get very complicated. Turin clearly understands that the true enemy of all monsters is the corrupt structure of the human social system itself. He knows very well that the mastermind behind all that unjust exploitation of magical creatures is the world government itself in the capital. The scientist carefully holds the valuable, gleaming fragment of Hitoya's tale that he received as a parting gift. The wizard vows to himself that he will use that powerful material to find a definitive way to repay his debt to the boy. He closes his eyes hopefully, deeply wishing that the young skeleton will become the key to changing the entire destiny of that world. With a determined expression, Turin focuses all his intellectual energies on advancing his secret biological research. Far away, in the bustling district of the eastern capital, commotion grips one of the taverns most frequented by local mercenaries. The warriors drink and laugh heartily while discussing the hottest gossip surrounding the guild's recent missions. Seated imposingly on a leather sofa, the fearsome gray-haired leader drinks his beverage with utter disdain and boredom. One of the drunken customers points excitedly, assuring everyone that he has an absolutely fascinating story to tell the guild leader. The man gleefully whispers that the famous leader Alvara failed miserably in his raid and ended up having his magnificent dragon stolen by a lancer. He continues the rumor in a conspiratorial tone, revealing that the survivors of the forest are spreading terrifying stories in the surrounding area. According to popular rumors, an extremely bizarre monster, with 10 gigantic sword-shaped tails and colossal fangs emerged, ruling the dungeon. The warriors burst into laughter, calling the story a ridiculous joke, but the Grey Chief is quite intrigued upon hearing about the anomalous chief. The silent leader gazes thoughtfully at the tavern ceiling, sensing that this rare creature might be quite an amusing target for him to hunt. The drunken mercenary stammers, trying to explain the exact location of the dark forest, admitting that he had drunk too much that night. Suddenly, a bolt of sharp red energy streaks across the hall and shatters the tavern's immense wooden chandelier with a deafening crash. Customers are in absolute panic when they see the ceiling collapse, unable to comprehend who would have the audacity to attack the establishment with a sword. With his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon, the gray-haired warrior asks intimidatingly if the chatterbox has finally sobered up. He turns slowly, displaying the majestic white cloak bearing the immense official symbol of the capital's government officials. The mercenaries are completely terrified and sweating profusely when they recognize the fearsome coat of arms emblazoned on the visitor's clothing. This refers to the legendary second-in-command of the imperial capital's subjugation, the ruthless warrior known as Kuga Asura. Kuga Asura displays a sadistic grin and, with gleaming eyes, assures that an unknown dungeon with an anomalous boss seems to be the perfect hunting ground for his amusement. In the dungeon, Turin amicably informs the young chief that the plan for total conquest has been officially cancelled. Hitoya stares at the scientist suspiciously, with the little wolf cub on his shoulder, demanding to know the real meaning behind all that charade. He realizes that the two hunters ended up fighting violently over the fate of the forest monsters. With a heart full of determination, the young skeleton's eyes gleam with a sky-blue hue, preparing to defend his home. Ronsolo trembles with humiliation upon realizing he has been completely rejected and considered weaker than a low-level chief. The enraged lancer raises his weapon against Hitoya, shouting hatefully at the young forest guardian. The monster hunter vows to defeat the boy no matter what, to prove his true worth to everyone in the capital. However, a gigantic wave of flying mechanical fish suddenly appears in the air to block Ronsolo's violent attack. Turin makes a precise movement with his arms, commanding his metal devices to neutralize the swordsman's attack. The wizard winks amicably at the skeleton boy, demonstrating complete complicity in the defense of the dungeon. Out of his mind, the villain activates his powerful special duplication ability to annihilate all his opponents at once. Hitoya acknowledges with great sadness and hatred that this terrible magical energy was stolen directly from his deceased dragon friend. The hunter laughs loudly, weapon in hand, boasting that his magic spear will become infinitely stronger as he hunts new prey. Ronsolo leaps violently, delivering a deadly blow, and vows that he will make his spear drink Hitoya's blood as well. The young skeleton prepares to withstand the destructive impact while the scientist merely observes the unfolding combat. With a relentless gaze, the boy vows that he will never allow the villain to continue profaning the power of his beloved dragon companion. The young chief bravely leaps and accepts the challenge, heading straight into the clash of forces amidst the energy storm. A colossal explosion of blue and purple light illuminates the entire underground clearing as the attacks of both warriors collide head-on. Hitoya's powerful fist strikes the sharp tip of the enemy's mystical spear in an utterly brutal physical clash. Ronsolo froze in terror as he realized that gigantic cracks were rapidly spreading across the metal blade of his weapon. With a deafening sound, the dangerous spearhead shatters completely into 1,000 pieces under the impact of the young man's blow. The young chief lands softly on the damp forest floor as the harmless remains of the weapon fall around his body. Hitoya gazes at one of the shimmering fragments in the palm of his skeletal hand, silently celebrating having finally freed the soul of his great dragon friend. Scientist Alan Turin observes in amazement the first signs of the mysterious evolutionary process of the dungeon. Lying on the damp forest floor, Ronsolo gasps heavily and cries out in hatred at the failure of his mission. The enraged lancer can hardly believe that his powerful mystical weapon has just been broken by a mere low-ranking monster. The fallen hunter punches the ground angrily, categorically refusing to accept his shameful defeat in the clearing. He leaps up in a furious jump and stretches out his arms to conjure his last secret spells. Ronsolo madly orders the young skeleton to bow in humiliation before his supreme combat power. The villain throws several glowing rings of subjugation aimed at binding the boy's body and mind once and for all. He screams with rage that he will slice up his opponent and turn him into valuable hunting material for the guild. Hitoya keeps his guard up with determination and positions himself to repel the enemy attack without hesitation. With incredible reflexes, the young leader leaps and shatters the rings of subjugation that were flying towards him. The force of the impact throws the hunter headfirst into the ground, shattering all of his remaining magical defenses. Ronsolo Lopez is completely paralyzed and sweating with terror at the colossal power demonstrated by the boy. Hitoya advances swiftly and lands the decisive blow that finally ends his opponent's blind fury. The hunter falls unconscious and utterly defeated at the base of a tree after receiving the final punch from the young man. The wizard Turin floats down to the ground and gazes at the dungeon's boundaries with a deeply reflective expression. The scientist silently adjusts his sunglasses as he analyzes the surreal force emanating from the young skeleton. Hitoya turns cautiously, keeping his skeletal tail in a guard position in case he needs to fight again. Turin praises the boy's strength and celebrates the fact that he actually managed to destroy the magical submission rings. The young chief stares at the man very seriously and demands to know his true purpose in that territory. He recalls that the scientist saved the little wolf, but also remembers the danger of the rings used to imprison monsters. The boy questions the intruder, asking if his plan wasn't to completely conquer and destroy the dungeon. Turin smiles calmly and sincerely confesses that destroying the dungeon was simply his contracted job. The scientist explains that he was hired to capture the boss, but insists that his personal interests lie elsewhere. Hitoya listens silently as the mage prepares to make a surprising revelation about himself. Turin places his hand on his chest and seriously details the true objective of his biological research. The wizard opens the collar of his white coat to reveal a secret long kept beneath his robes. He reveals that he possesses a brilliant and painful ring of subjugation deeply embedded in his own skin. Hitoya is completely shocked and speechless upon witnessing that mark of slavery on a human. The boy stared at the bright red collar, unable to comprehend how it ended up on the scientist's body. He stares at Turin's neck, trying to grasp the gravity of this terrifying discovery. The young skeleton's eyes widen as he realizes that magical slavery also affects the humans of the capital. Turin reveals that he is a hybrid, born to a human father and a monster mother, living on the border between the two rival species. The wizard confesses that, although he has the official mission to hunt him down, he prefers to keep the young chief safe. The researcher explains that his only true desire in life is to invent an effective method to break free from that ring of control. He gazes at the boy hopefully, knowing that Hitoya's special abilities are crucial to breaking the chains of subjugation. The scientist promises to keep things under wraps in the outside world to ensure no one suspects the dungeon's progress. Turin solemnly swears that he will not kill any local monsters and that he will not attempt to conquer the territory through hostility. The man smiles gently and asks permission to return to the dungeon in the future, solely for the purpose of conducting peaceful investigations. Hitoya remains silent, staring intently at the mage as he ponders the level of trust he can place in him. The boy deduces that the scientist fears the hunters from the capital and would do anything to escape that slavery. In fact, Turin secretly plans to gain the boy's trust in order to later use him as research material in the creation of his weapon. Suddenly, the little dragon Atta emerges, flying from the treetops, letting out an extremely fierce warning screech. The small animal warns in terror that Turin is the same man who attacked his companion Yatta in the past and calls him a dangerous enemy. The scientist takes a step back and sincerely apologizes to the little dragons for the misunderstanding that occurred on their first mission. The researcher begins to float towards the portal and says with a smile that he hopes their next encounter will be far less violent. As he silently walks away into the woods, Turin mentally celebrates having finally found a way to break his terrible ring of subjugation. The researcher focuses his thoughts on devising a clever trap to catch the young skeleton off guard at their next encounter. Atta flies alongside Hitoya and asks quite indignantly if he really thinks it's right to let that intruder go so easily. The young man becomes very thoughtful and sweats profusely, questioning whether he actually made the right decision in allowing the scientist to return to the outside world. He recalls the man's sad words about his hybrid origin, being the product of a forbidden union between a human and a monster. Hitoya gazed thoughtfully at the horizon with a serious look, feeling the weight of the revelations he had just heard about that cruel world. He wonders if there are many other hybrid beings suffering from the mark of slavery in territories dominated by humans. The young man recalls the scientist's solemn response, confirming that the pain of subjugation extends to many other innocent people out there. He recalls with horror the image of dark laboratories where hybrid creatures were artificially created to be enslaved by the guild. Hitoya is deeply shocked to understand the sad and revolting reality that the monsters face far from the dungeon. The boy watches the scientist's silhouette fading into the darkness and wonders if the human world hides so many injustices. Suddenly, the young skeleton takes a firm stance and shouts, asking Alain Turin to wait just a moment longer. With a painful metallic snap, Hitoya begins to tear a piece of his own tailbone structure away. The boy's mouth opens, gasping heavily as he feels the excruciating pain of that voluntary physical sacrifice. Both the scientist and the little dragon turned around quickly and were completely paralyzed with shock at the bizarre scene. Hitoya pulls with all his determination and breaks a sharp thorn from his own gleaming bones. The boy extends his arm, trembling with pain, and offers the fragment as the material the researcher had been searching for. He lets out a low groan, trying to contain the physical suffering that is consuming his entire chest at that moment. The young man stands firmly in the clearing under the astonished gazes of his loyal forest companions. With a gentle and very generous gesture, Hitoya extends his hands, offering the relic and instructing the scientist to use it in his experiments. Alain Turin is completely speechless and sweating profusely, unable to understand why the boy so spontaneously donated part of his tail. The young leader explains that he wants to help other enslaved people in the outside world who also need this power of liberation. The scientist stares at the skeleton in absolute silence, deeply touched by the unusual kindness of that mysterious guardian of monsters. Hitoya shrugs casually, commenting that the injustice with the collars simply bothered him too much to ignore. With eyes shining in a friendly light, the boy confesses that he simply didn't want to pretend he hadn't seen the man's suffering. The young man places the glistening bone fragment directly into the trembling hands of the researcher in the white lab coat. Alain Turin stares at the relic in his palm, his eyes wide, feeling an overwhelming emotion wash over him. The scientist smiles sincerely and emotionally, demonstrating immense gratitude for having received the support he so desperately sought. Hitoya's beautiful, radiant smile breaks into a beaming grin of pure satisfaction as he realizes he was able to help his new companion take his first step. Observing the friendly scene from afar, Ada makes a rather sulky pout, showing that he still hasn't accepted the intruder's friendship. The little dragon cautiously warns that she still doesn't trust the scientist, and Hitoya replies with a laugh that it's okay for her to feel that way. Ada sighs, calling his master naive and too docile, while the boy lets out a contagious laugh of pure amusement. Floating with his robotic fish around the gleaming bone, Alain Turin begins the preliminary analysis of that powerful mystical component. The scientist gazes at the relic, amazed to find that such a generous and extraordinary creature truly inhabits that world. As a way of showing his gratitude, the man decides to reveal a fascinating secret about why that dungeon is considered unpredictable. He details that, although the dungeon has risen to level E, there are records of only 7 dungeons that have managed to rise in rank throughout history. Alain Turin projects a floating screen in his hand and explains that the minimum achievement level varies according to the dungeon rank. The panel identifies the scientist as the powerful level 89 mage Alain Turin, detailing the strict rules of the entry system. Hitoya scratches his head, quite intrigued by the technical explanation, and asks curiously what it actually means in practice. The wizard explains in detail that warriors of levels lower than those required by the ranking system are barred from entering the dungeon. A hologram of an immense stone tower illustrates adventurers of inadequate level being prevented from crossing the main portal. Alain Turin further reveals that the mythical SSS ranking requires the absurd level of 999, something no warrior has ever achieved. Hitoya and the little monsters are speechless when they discover that no one in the history of humankind has managed to challenge an SSS rank dungeon. The scientist concludes that if the dungeon continues to level up and reaches the maximum SSS rating, it will become an absolutely unbeatable dungeon. The boy's eyes widened in astonishment at the thought of transforming his small home into a completely impenetrable fortress. Alain Turin earnestly warns that ranking up will also attract infinitely stronger enemies, making daily combat much more difficult. Before they could continue their conversation, a gigantic explosion of golden light suddenly erupted in the middle of the forest clearing. A large system message floats flashing in the air announcing that the rank-up process restart has been successfully initiated. Hitoya and Ada gasp in astonishment and cover their faces as they witness the immense storm of mystical energy engulfing the ground. The immense stone gate of the dungeon cracks and begins to emit a colossal golden glow, initiating yet another glorious territorial expansion. Aligned Turin shields his eyes from the intense golden light and is impressed to witness the actual workings of the ranking system. The wizard's eyes widened as he noticed an unusual and fantastical change occurring in the dungeon's sky. Hitoya stares at the forest ceiling, quite confused, and asks the scientist what that large, shining structure could be. The young skeleton is completely speechless as he contemplates the immense magical energy that begins to concentrate above them. A majestic and colossal golden door appears floating among the treetops of the deep forest. The boy couldn't hide his immense astonishment at the majestic and gleaming golden door that had materialized directly on the cave ceiling. Hitoya points upwards in complete disbelief and wonders with great agitation what kind of fascinating mystery that locked portal hides. A holographic screen on the system flashes gold, warning that the new, unexplored area of the dungeon will remain sealed. The magnificent golden structure floats majestically among the dense foliage of the underground forest, bathing the entire scene in its light. Turin approaches and calmly explains that beyond that immense locked gate lies the dungeon's mystical treasure. Both the young skeleton and little Atta jump in fright and exclaim in surprise upon hearing the revelation about the mystical relic. The wizard explains that high-level dungeons are incredibly difficult to conquer due to their internal barriers. He illustrates his point by noting that many elite adventurers often end up seriously injured when attempting to steal the spoils from these locations. Hitoya stares at the scientist, intrigued and frowning, trying to understand how the amount of treasure affects the level of challenge. Turin clearly explains that, in order to conquer the place completely, the hunters are obliged to obtain even the last mystical relic. He cheerfully adds that possessing various treasures is a great advantage for them, as it effectively prevents the dungeon from collapsing completely. Suddenly, a new golden flash emanating from the portal's inscriptions catches the attention of the entire group gathered there. The forest mausoleum system projects a large notice detailing the new special conditions for unlocking the portal. Hitoya reads the system message with wide eyes, discovering with shock that he will need to raise the dungeon's classification to rank A. The boy mentally calculates that he will need to raise his house 4 levels to successfully cross the portal. The system panel begins to continuously calculate the rate of warriors that must be defeated to start the new phase. Turin rests his hand under his chin in a very analytical way and questions what the quota of people needed would be for rank A. The wizard shares historical records from other dungeons that have been leveled up in an attempt to estimate the number of invaders needed. The scientist does the math and reveals that they will need to make at least 10,000 human adventurers fail in the dungeon. Atta stares at the master worriedly and wonders how many years it will take the group to defeat so many warriors at once. Turin seriously admits that reaching the milestone of 10,000 human defeats will indeed require a long and arduous journey of struggles. He points out that the outside world is dominated by humans who possess an overwhelmingly absurd military advantage over the monsters. The wizard concludes that the current reality for magical creatures living outside the dungeon is filled with injustice and danger. Hitoya stares at the ground with a deeply depressed expression, recalling the suffering endured by innocent monsters in that unjust world. The young man realizes with concern that 10,000 is a frightening number and recalls the difficult battles he fought against previous hunters. However, the memory of his oath of protection strengthens his soul, and he vows to do everything to keep everyone safe. The boy's lovely, gentle smile spreads across his face as he envisions the day when all magical creatures will live safe and sound in that sanctuary. He decides to push away the sadness and focuses on doing whatever it takes to build a future full of peace and security for his family. The young skeleton stands firmly before the wizard, displaying an absolutely admirable determination throughout his body. Turin gazes at the boy with pride, noticing that he continues to move forward steadily, undeterred by the despair of reality. The scientist narrows his eyes and gazes at his boss with admiration, confirming that the boy really is a very unusual creature. The wizard smiles gently, concluding that this great rise in territorial rank is the only salvation to break the rings of subjugation. Turin begins the retreat from the dungeon and commands his mechanical beasts to collect the warrior Ronsolo Lopez, who is lying on the ground. The flock of metal fish suspends the wounded invader in the air under the watchful and satisfied gaze of Hitoya and his friends. The scientist amicably assures that he will withdraw the official request to conquer the dungeon, faithfully fulfilling his agreement. Hitoya gently placed his hand on his chest, smiling and sincerely thanking his new ally for his invaluable help. 7 days pass, and the corrupt nobleman slams his fist forcefully against the desk in his immense private office. Ronsolo Lopez grits his teeth and curses his bad luck for failing an F-rank raid, ruining his dignity. Lord Pedro Detlas tries to calm his ally's agitated state and asks him to remain calm. The monster hunter rages, yelling that he demands additional compensation and wants his professional reputation restored at all costs. The villain displays a greedy grin and suggests devising a new and dangerous clandestine strategy to make a fortune from the dungeon. Pedro Detla silently pours a glass of wine, paying little attention to the theatrical tantrums of the defeated warrior. The nobleman calmly offers the drink, asking the lancer to state his exact terms. He ironically vows to do everything he can to restore his business partner's honor in a very profitable way. The two seal their wicked pact by clinking glasses of wine in the middle of the luxurious ballroom of the eastern capital. Ronsolo Lopez calmly drinks the contents of his glass while continuing to outline the details of his evil plan. He plans to use the additional funds to buy new elite weapons and cause the total collapse of that dungeon. The hunter's sinister grin drifted to the corner of his mouth, savoring in advance his terrible revenge against the magical creatures of the forest. However, the glass suddenly slips from her trembling hand and falls onto the carpet, spilling the red wine. The warrior's eyes widen, and he begins to sweat with terror as he feels a lethal and agonizing burning sensation paralyze his entire body. Desperate and breathless, Ronsolo Lopez kneels before the Lord as he tries to expel the terrible poison from his throat. Lord Pedro Detlas merely stares at him with a sadistic and mocking smile, stating that with that death, the hunter will no longer have to live in the shame of failure. Ronsolo tries to stammer something, blood dripping from his lips, unable to believe that he has been brutally betrayed by his own political ally. In a few moments, the hunter falls completely lifeless onto the luxurious office carpet, which becomes stained with a huge pool of blood. Pedro sighs dismissively and complains ironically about how that new type of poison ends up staining the entire carpet in his living room. Suddenly, a bluish light appears behind the nobleman, while a cold, terrifying voice warns that it witnessed the entire murder. Looking back in fright, the Lord comes face to face with Alain Turin, who observes the whole situation very calmly with his hands in his pockets. With an enigmatic smile and a wink, the scientist calmly asks if they should also have a conversation right then. Pedro tries to hide his panic and bows politely, offering sincere apologies for exposing the researcher to such an unpleasant execution scene. The nobleman rests his hand on his chin and tries to justify himself, claiming that getting rid of rebellious and useless elements is common practice in the capital's politics. Alain agrees mockingly and ironically, maintaining his rather friendly tone of voice to continue cornering the politician. Feeling the immense pressure of the atmosphere, Pedro begins to sweat and questions what the visitor really wants to discuss with him there. The scientist points firmly and warns that he has no interest whatsoever in the man, but demands to know the secrets the Lord is hiding from the capital. The nobleman tries to feign ignorance with a nervous laugh, asking what he could possibly be hiding that is so important from the government. Without wasting any time, Alain begins reciting several absurdly precise numbers from memory, leaving the politician completely speechless. He reveals that the Lord turned a blind eye to over 2,000 arrests for trafficking and profited billions of dollars in illegal bribes over 30 years. Pedro turns completely pale and horrified when he realizes that all his corruption crimes have been meticulously exposed. The nobleman is in a complete panic, knowing that he has meticulously falsified over 1,000 records and that no one in the imperial capital should know about these frauds. Trembling with fear, he stares at the visitor, unable to comprehend how that man discovered all this in such a terrifying way. A line explains that he possesses the extraordinary ability to never forget anything that his 5 senses have ever perceived, even once in his life. He reveals that this powerful innate technique is called perfect memory and makes his eyes glow with an intense sky-blue glow. Pedro becomes utterly desperate when he realizes that the scientist in front of him is not an ordinary human, but a veritable monster in the form of a researcher. The wizard shows an official document from the world government decreeing Pedro's dismissal, proving that he has been discarded and is no longer useful to the capital. A line drops the paper in the air and comments that, although that fraud is insignificant to the leaders, the government simply loves to purge any rebellious element. The bloodied sheet of paper falls onto the carpet right next to Ronsolo's body, symbolizing the definitive end of that nobleman's career. The scientist leaves the office, coldly stating that this is the capital's standard method for correcting societal order, leaving Pedro kneeling in despair. Meanwhile, a starry and peaceful night falls upon the mysterious ruins of the Forest Mausoleum, the E-level dungeon. Inside, Hitoya comments with considerable concern about the madness of offering one's own body as biological material to an outside hunter. Ada points her finger and argues furiously with the boy, ordering him never again to dare tear pieces of his bones to give to strangers. The young skeleton bows in a very cute way and sincerely apologizes for having worried the entire local monster gang so much with his behavior. The other dragon watches the scene in surprise and comments that he finds it amusing to see that his companion is finally concerned about someone else's safety. Ada turns extremely red with embarrassment and loudly denies that she was truly worried about that stubborn skeleton. Hitoya smiles fondly as he sees that his beloved local creatures are getting along so well and seem like a truly close-knit family. With a small wolf cub on his shoulder, the boy draws the group's attention and decides it's time to seriously plan their next move in the dungeon. The young man reveals with great enthusiasm that the main objective from now on is to develop the territory until it reaches the legendary SSS classification. He explains that in order to achieve this great rank increase, they will need to make at least 10,000 human adventurers fail in the dungeon. Ada stares intently at the master, focusing his bright eyes on every detail the young skeleton is about to describe. The boy ponders that for humans to succeed in their conquest, they need to obtain materials or treasures and escape the dungeon alive. On the other hand, the challenger's failure consists of fleeing empty-handed without stealing any relics or simply dying within the territory. The young man admits with relief that knowing they don't necessarily need to take the lives of 10,000 people to evolve lifts a huge weight off his shoulders. Ada points out that even without needing to kill anyone, the quota of 10,000 defeats is still an absurd number, and that the rise in level will take a long time. Hitoya thoughtfully agrees, knowing that the longer they take to evolve, the greater the risk of suffering a hostile invasion by elite adventurers. He gazes at the mystical depictions of skills and treasures, admitting to himself that this mysterious world functions exactly like a role-playing video game. The young boss scratches his head with an awkward smile, realizing he's experiencing a reality so similar to video games. With a serious and focused gaze, the boy decides that his priority now is to study and learn much more about how the laws of that fantastical world work. He plans to bombard the friendly scientist with questions about the capital and the humans the next time he comes to visit them in the forest. Far away, Alain Turin travels silently on the back of a majestic mechanical whale under the starry sky of the outside world. The wizard reflects with satisfaction that the corrupt lord of the eastern capital has been defeated, and that he seized the perfect opportunity to cancel the official order to invade the dungeon. He stares intently at the vastness of the night, knowing that things outside the forest are about to get very complicated. Turin understands that the true enemy of all monsters is not the individual hunters, but rather the cruel system that governs that world through the exploitation of magical creatures. Align Turin knows very well that the brilliant mind behind all that oppression against the monsters is the world government itself in the capital. He gazes in admiration at the gleaming fragment of the tail he received from the young skeleton, feeling an inexplicable magical energy emanating from the bone. The scientist vows from the bottom of his heart that he will use all his intellect to find a way to repay the boy's enormous generosity. Align closes his eyes hopefully, deeply wishing that the young skeleton will become the key to changing the entire destiny of that unjust world. With a very serious and focused gaze, the researcher decides to proceed immediately with his secret biological research. Far away, commotion takes over one of the busiest taverns in the eastern capital, where several warriors drink and laugh boisterously. Seated imposingly on the sofa, the gray-haired leader drinks calmly while a henchman rushes towards him with urgent news. The gray warrior stared at the glass with boredom, complaining about how terribly monotonous the environment and the people around him were for him. The mercenary with the green bandana grins broadly and announces that he has an absolutely fascinating story to tell his boss. He whispers that the famous leader Al-Bala ended up failing in the dungeon and had his gigantic dragon humiliatingly stolen by a spear hunter. The man moves even closer and confides in a conspiratorial tone that the rumors about the place are terrifying. According to popular rumors, a gigantic boss emerged with 10 sword-shaped tails and a mouthful of teeth larger than arrows. While the other hunters laugh at that bizarre description, the silent leader stares at the glass, quite intrigued by the presence of an anomalous chief. He gazes thoughtfully at the tavern's chandelier, sensing that this mysterious creature might be quite an amusing opponent to face. The drunken mercenary stammers, trying to explain the exact location of the dark forest, admitting with a laugh that he had drunk quite a bit that night. In a fraction of a second, the gray leader unleashes a devastating crimson gust of wind so powerful that it shatters the chandelier and splits the entire table in two. All the tavern patrons fall back in complete panic, unable to comprehend who would have the audacity to cut through the place with such ease. With an intimidating look, the man coldly asks if the talkative subordinate has finally managed to sober up after that scare. He rises, revealing his majestic white robe with the immense official coat of arms emblazoned on the back. The mercenaries begin to sweat with terror and stammer as they recognize the fearsome symbol of the government's special forces. This refers to the legendary second-in-command of the imperial capital's subjugation, the ruthless warrior known as Kuga Asura. With a sadistic grin and gleaming eyes, Asura asserts that an unknown dungeon with an anomalous boss seems like the perfect hunting ground for him to have some fun. Back in the underground laboratory of the East Wing, Align Turin studies the bone relic floating in his biological containment tank. The scientist stares at the piece of tail that the young skeleton entrusted to him, analyzing the magical structure of that powerful component. He smiles with relief, realizing that his research to remove the leash of subjugation is finally progressing very promisingly. Turin remembers with admiration Hitoya's promise to use his extraordinary strength to free all the suffering monsters in the outside world. The wizard reaches out to monitor the system data and check the current status of his young ally's dungeon. Suddenly, the screen displays a warning that a new high-level invasion is underway, commanded by a level 120 swordsman. The scientist's eyes widen, and he is completely paralyzed with shock upon reading the name of the fearsome warrior who has just entered the dungeon. The system panel begins flashing red erratically, indicating the presence of a devastating energy source in the forest. Turin is thrown into utter despair upon realizing that, of all the people in the world, the intruder is none other than the fearsome official of the imperial government. The wizard bites his fingers in sheer nervousness, knowing that if Asura fights seriously, he will conquer and ruthlessly destroy the entire dungeon. In the dungeon forest, a strong tremor begins to shake the trees, leaving Hitoya quite apprehensive about the arrival of the intruder. Hidden deep in the woods next to Atta, The young skeleton realizes that an incredibly powerful warrior has just used the entrance gates. Kuga Asura walks calmly through the dungeon clearing with an imposing posture, gazing into the surrounding darkness. The young chief focuses his gaze on the warrior's hand and realizes with alarm that he is wielding a mysterious katana-type sword. Hitoya stared suspiciously at the visitor from the treetops, wondering if this strange intruder was some kind of delinquent samurai. The swordsman lowers his head silently, concentrating an absurd amount of murderous energy around his body. Feeling the immense pressure of the approaching blow, the young skeleton's eyes widen as he desperately realizes the situation is extremely dangerous. In the blink of an eye, a red line of energy cuts through the air and slices through an entire gigantic tree right behind the boy. Hitoya and the little dragon jump in fright to avoid the colossal tree trunk that collapses with a violent crash in the middle of the forest. The young chief is completely speechless when he realizes that the hunter was able to slice through that massive tree with a single movement of his sword. He lands nimbly on the damp grass and stares at the intruder, who stares back with an extremely calm expression. Hitoya mentally activates his status screen as he tries to decipher the true identity and intentions of that dangerous imperial warrior. Asura observes the skeleton boy with utter disdain, maintaining a cold expression that shows no concern for the danger. The swordsman stares at the boy's floating screen and asks in surprise if the combat level of that dungeon boss is completely bugged in the system. The warrior's broad smile surfaced as he realized that the absurd rumors about an unknown dungeon boss were true. He slowly draws his katana and displays an expression of pure madness, eager to begin the fight once and for all. Asura laughs as he warns that he's tired of hunting weak opponents in the outside world and challenges the young chief to a life-or-death fight right there. Hitoya and the Yata dragon take a tense step back as they sense the overwhelming aura of the level 120 officer preparing to attack them. Ata screams desperately and announces that she will fight alongside her master to provide cover during the difficult combat. Kuga Asura makes a disgusted expression and mocks the winged creature, calling the small dragon mere insignificant trash. The ruthless swordsman draws his katana, enveloped in a terrifying red aura, and coldly orders the monster not to interfere in his battle. Hitoya stares at his opponent with great tension, realizing that this hunter's level is infinitely superior to any enemy he has ever faced in his life. The young chief turns quickly and orders the little dragon to retreat immediately to the safety of the deep forest. With a gentle, knowing smile, he calms the cub and asks it to protect the other dragon instead of worrying about him. Even with a heavy heart filled with fear, Ata accepts his master's order and decides to flap his wings to fly away. Without wasting any more time, the boy activates his windblade technique and swiftly advances, unleashing energy blasts against his rival. The immense green wind projectiles cut through the air with extreme precision, heading towards the powerful swordsman. However, Asura simply ignores the attacks and runs at high speed, easily dodging each of the air blades. The hunter lets out a frenzied laugh and raises his katana, gleaming bright red, to launch a counterattack. The system activates Ashura's powerful special ability, causing his weapon to concentrate an overwhelming amount of dark magic. Hitoya tries to dodge, but is struck by an overwhelming sequence of swift cuts that tear through his chest and arms. The government official ironically praises the boy's impressive reflexes, but continues his frenetic pace of sword strikes. Seeing the trail of the slashing attack leading towards the clearing, the young skeleton despairs, realizing that the blow will strike deep into the forest. Asura appears like a ghost before him and coldly questions why the boy is diverting his attention from the fight right in front of him. The villain rests his sword on his shoulder and mockingly remarks that it's a tremendous waste of time to see a warrior with good moves distracted by weak allies. With an extremely grim look, the hunter states through clenched teeth that strong warriors should never be limited by the weaknesses of others. He channels his destructive magic once more and unleashes a gigantic vertical slash that splits the ground in two. The sadistic swordsman mercilessly warns that he will make sure to eliminate the weak little dragon that fled into the woods first. Hitoya panics completely when he realizes that Ashura's lethal attack was aimed precisely at his friend's hideout. Desperate to protect Ada's life, the young chief activates his mystical defense technique with all the spiritual energy he has left. A massive, deafening explosion of red and blue energy crashes into the middle of the clearing, splitting the landscape in two upon impact. The boy lets out a scream of pure terror and despair upon realizing that his defensive barrier was not enough to stop the attack. The terrifying, cutting blast strikes the small dragon squarely, causing the poor creature to scream in agony as it is brutally wounded. Hitoya stared at the scene in complete shock, feeling his heart shatter with grief at seeing his dear friend killed like that. Asura emerges from the dust and coldly warns that stopping to lament in the middle of a battlefield is the greatest mistake a warrior can make. Before he could react, the boy received a devastating sword blow that violently threw him straight to the ground. The young chief falls motionless to the ground as his thoughts begin to fail him in the face of the excruciating pain of that serious injury. Far away, Turin clasps his hands thoughtfully and reflects that, although Hitoya's physical strength is comparable to that of an officer, the reality of combat is cruel. He knows very well that Asura's magical katana possesses the terrifying mystical ability to cut through absolutely any matter in that world. If the young skeleton continues to receive those relentless attacks, his physical body and soul will be sliced apart without any chance of defense. The fair-haired scientist prays anxiously, knowing that the death of the dungeon's leader will bring the worst possible fate to that sanctuary. He recalls with dread that if the guardian is killed, the sacred treasure will be stolen, and the entire dungeon structure will collapse completely. Lying in a pool of blood, Hitoya stares helplessly at the cave sky, while the relentless Asura watches him from above with utter indifference. The swordsman wipes the blood from his katana and calls the boy an idiot for letting himself be defeated so easily just because of an injured ally. The hunter stomps hard on the boy and grumbles in disappointment, admitting that in the end, an E-level dungeon is still very weak. Asura sheathes his sword and decides to walk towards the inner temple, focused only on retrieving the golden ark and returning to the capital. Back in the east wing of the underground research lab, Turin stares apprehensively at the monitoring data floating in the reception area. The electronic panel displays a golden notification confirming that the level 120 swordsman has successfully completed the dungeon raid. The scientist lowers his head in deep sadness, realizing that not even the young skeleton was able to contain the brute force of that officer. However, upon analyzing the additional data on the floating screen, the wizard notices something extremely intriguing and unusual. His eyes widen as he notices that the dungeon is still active on the map, indicating that Asura has not yet definitively conquered the territory. Turin rests his chin on his fingers, cleverly trying to unravel what really happened during that fierce battle. The researcher silently wonders if the dungeon guardian somehow miraculously managed to survive the devastating sword attack. Suddenly, the metal reception door opens with a soft noise, abruptly interrupting the scientist's analytical thoughts. Turin calmly turns around and greets the visitor in a very friendly manner upon realizing that it is the fearsome gray-haired imperial warrior. Asura enters the room, throwing his white cloak over his shoulder, and greets the bespectacled researcher in an extremely calm tone. The warrior settles comfortably onto the blue sofa in the laboratory and decides to get straight to the point about the mission he had discussed in the message. The swordsman extends his hand and displays the mystical gold ring he stole from the dungeon, demanding that Turin conduct a thorough investigation into the properties of that sacred relic. Aligned, Turin examines the golden ring with curiosity and silently reflects on the value of this newly acquired mystical treasure. He touches the relic's gleaming surface and immediately feels an immense wave of magical power course through his fingers. The scientist is completely paralyzed with shock when the system screen reveals that the ring is the right hand of Prometheus, responsible for managing the dungeon. Asura looks at him with a confident smile and asks if the object truly possesses some dangerous curse or something even greater behind its power. The warrior explains that, despite having recovered the mystical relic from the bottom of the cave, the game's system bizarrely failed to register the total extermination of the dungeon. Turin adjusts his glasses and stares intently at the artifact, concluding that this mysterious territory hides far deeper secrets. He projects an image of the portal onto the ceiling and deduces that this secret passage to the unexplored areas should not have been opened so easily. The scientist theorizes that there is a second relic hidden in the underground forest, a treasure that possibly not even the dungeon master knows exists. Asura stares at him, intrigued, and comments disdainfully that, as the greatest genius in the Academy's correction center, the mage surely should know something more. The gray-haired swordsman rests his chin, recalling that in the Academy's golden generation, the scientist in the white lab coat was by far the #1 student. Ignoring the compliments, Turin stares at the luminous ring and asks with considerable apprehension what really happened to the guardian who protected the treasure. Asura leans back on the sofa and explains that the boss was a strange creature with a glitched power level, admitting that the outcome of that hunt was very boring. The Gray Warrior coldly reveals that the skeleton boy simply turned to dust the instant he sliced through the entire deep forest with his sword. Meanwhile, the quiet calm of the night returns to cover the immense stone dome of the forest mausoleum. Suddenly, a strong, brilliant explosion of magical dust and golden light illuminates the entire interior of the Level E dungeon. In the dark depths of the subterranean cave, the immense roots of the trees begin to pulsate with a very comforting vital energy. The first sacred arc reappears enveloped in a beautiful, shimmering whirlwind, fully restoring the magical protective barriers of the place. Sitting high on a tree branch, Hitoya observes the forest in absolute silence, with a rather sad and melancholic expression. The young chief reflects that, although the fearsome imperial hunter stole the golden ring, somehow the dungeon did not collapse. He stares at his own trembling hands and thanks the system for allowing him to return to life, but he cannot contain the anguish he feels in his chest. Images of the cruel moment when his body and his allies were sliced apart by Ashura's red katana continue to haunt his skeletal mind. Alone on the branch of the large tree, the boy huddles, hugging his legs and bitterly laments not having been strong enough to protect them again. At that moment, the little dragon Atta appears, flying smoothly through the foliage and landing gently very close to his master. Hitoya raises his head in fright upon seeing the small creature and whispers its name with great concern and affection. The boy apologizes sweetly, regretting having put the little animal through such a terrifying near-death experience due to his weakness. The dragon stared intently at the young skeleton in absolute silence, listening to every sad word from its protector. Atta narrows her beautiful, bright blue eyes and says affectionately that the master has a heart that is too gentle and soft for that world. The little creature confesses that being just a low-level, disposable monster, it never imagined that someone would dedicate their life to defending it from hunters. She recalls that the monsters in that world are treated like worthless trash, but that the boy was the only one who cared enough to give them all a safe home. Atta assures with great emotion that she knows perfectly well how strange and generous the boy's kindness is in the face of so much human cruelty. The dragon playfully asks the boss to stop apologizing, assuring him that even after being hit by the wind blast, he managed to fully recover by his side. Hitoya remains tense and reflects that the group in the deep hideout were just very lucky not to have suffered the imminent collapse of the rocky cave. The boy lowered his head, sweating with terror, knowing that if the dungeon had collapsed, all his little friends would be dead and lost forever. Suddenly, a joyful chorus of barks echoes from below, and dozens of small wolf pups excitedly run to the base of the large tree. The young chief looks down, completely surprised, to notice that the entire local pack has come to visit him in the middle of the underground forest. Atta flashes a lovely, small smile and gently explains that all the creatures there share the same feeling of love and gratitude for him. The little dragon flaps its wings, offering support to its master and affectionately inviting him to come down and join his little friends in the grass. Hitoya leaps from the branch and glides smoothly, surrounded by his winged allies, towards the large pack of wolf pups that excitedly await him. As he gently landed on the green grass of the dungeon, the boy gazed at the group, his cheeks flushed and his expression deeply emotional. The boy tries to hold back tears and stammers, offering sincere apologies to them all for failing to stop the Imperial swordsman's violent advance. Instead of complaining, the little wolves jump up happily and cover the young skeleton with a veritable feast of licks and sincere affection. They rub against their master affectionately, proving in a very sweet way that their love for him is greater than any defeat in battle. Hitoya gazed at the cub, his bright eyes brimming with sweetness and affection, feeling immense joy in his heart. Enveloped by the comforting warmth beneath the cave's lagoon, Hitoya curls up in the soft grass and falls into a deep sleep alongside all his beloved local monsters. At dawn, the boy opens his eyes determined and clenches his skeletal fists, feeling an enormous willpower renew his fighting spirit. He gazes at his little friends sleeping peacefully and solemnly vows that he will use his eternal existence to keep each of them protected from any external threat. The young leader understands that so far things have been relatively easy and that he has managed to circumvent the invasions without major difficulties. However, he knows very well that from now on, the dungeon will begin to attract hunters far more powerful than conventional forces. He recalls with great seriousness the humiliation of the previous defeat and concludes that his current fighting power is still insufficient against the elite leaders. Hitoya gazes thoughtfully at the horizon, aware that to achieve the legendary SSS rank and secure eternal freedom, they will need to face incredibly powerful enemies in the future. Hitoya understands that to win the upcoming battles, he will need to master the compatibility of techniques, fighting styles, and reading his opponents. He recalls with seriousness Asura's cold words stating that the strong should never be limited by the weak. Clenching his fists tightly against the ground, the young boss vows to himself that he will never accept losing to anyone again. With his eyes gleaming an intense blue, the boy decides that his one and only greatest wish is to survive alongside all his friends. Meanwhile, in the underground research laboratory, Turin stares at the golden relic in his hand and decides to begin investigating its properties. He reflects that this unexpected situation actually represents a unique opportunity and the perfect shortcut to elevate the dungeon to rank A. The scientist smiles excitedly and suggests that, in addition to studying the ring, they should reinvestigate the dungeon personally, accompanied by Asura. Upon hearing the sudden suggestion to return to that underground forest, the fearsome swordsman makes a rather confused and irritated face. Turin rests his chin with a smirk, teasing his ally by saying that deep down he's itching to fight the Guardian again. The Imperial warrior maintained a serious expression for a few moments, leaving the atmosphere in the reception room quite tense and silent. Then, Asura breaks into a sadistic smile, his eyes gleaming red, and warns that he hopes this journey will not be a waste of time. Back in the dungeon, Hitoya concentrates intensely and channels his brilliant blue energy to prepare for the invaders' return. He climbs to the top of a pointed rock and stares intently at the immense golden portal locked in the cave ceiling. The young boss knows that facing strong opponents is inevitable to achieve the legendary SSS rank, and decides to use each battle as fuel to evolve. The boy recalls that the dungeon didn't collapse even after the Ark was stolen, which means the hunter will surely return soon. He recalls that the katana strike that severed his tail and sliced through half the forest is too powerful an attack to be blocked directly. Hitoya seriously considers that simply trying to continuously dodge sword strikes would be too naive a strategy to work. The boy admits to himself that it's biologically impossible to defeat a level 120 swordsman by simply playing defensively. He thinks he could even escape on his own, but he absolutely refuses to let any of his friends get hurt in that battle. The young skeleton anxiously wonders how he will ever be able to react and counterattack a physical power as absurd as Asura's. Suddenly, a deafening noise of tremors begins to shake the entire stone structure of the great main gate of the dungeon. Hitoya goes on high alert, and his eyes widen when he realizes that a new challenger has just entered the territory's boundaries. Hearing slow, rhythmic footsteps echoing in the dark entrance of the cave, the young guardian prepares for the worst possible scenario. The boy jumps in fright and becomes completely speechless as he focuses his gaze on the approaching silhouettes. He gazes at the entrance and sees the wizard Turin walking calmly beside the fearsome gray-haired imperial officer. The young skeleton is completely shocked, wondering why those two warriors are walking together as if they were partners. He remembers the promise of help he received from Turin, and wonders if he ended up being brutally betrayed by the scientist in the white coat. The boy assumes a defensive posture and angrily asks if the two are actually allies planning to destroy the dungeon once and for all. Turin flashes a friendly smile and casually reveals that the two are actually colleagues working for the same organization. The wizard explains that Asura told him about the battle and says he was surprised to note that stealing the treasure didn't cause the territory to collapse. The scientist tells the boy to relax, assuring him that they haven't come to complete the dungeon, but rather to present a valuable business proposal. He points to the gleaming ceiling and claims he holds the perfect key to help them both solve the mysteries of that dungeon. Turin explains that the plan will help the boy circumvent the system's rules and unlock the immense golden portal. He points out that the initial goal of the dungeon is to reach rank A, which would normally require the absurd quota of making 10,000 adventurers fail. Hitoya listens intently as the researcher prepares to reveal his elaborate plan for accelerated leveling up. The fair-haired wizard smirks and reveals that he has discovered a surprising shortcut capable of making the territory jump straight to rank A. He proposes that they conduct a new field investigation at the site and warns that Asura will actively participate in the entire analysis process. Turin explains that for that plan to work perfectly, they will need the essential help of a warrior classified as transcendental. The young dungeon warden tilted his head, quite confused upon hearing that term, which was completely unfamiliar to him. The scientist explains that a transcendental is the official title given to any human adventurer who has surpassed the level 100 barrier. He reveals that there are historical records of ancient dungeons that underwent a special rank evolution shortly after a transcendent failed the raid. Hitoya is astonished to realize that this forced glitch essentially functions as a cheat code to level up the dungeon quickly. Asura rests his arm on his shoulder and remarks mockingly that if he leaves empty-handed, the dungeon's secret information will be revealed. The swordsman provocatively asks if he will really have to endure the public shame of failing to complete an E-level dungeon. Turin laughs and retorts, saying that the Grey Ally never actually cared about reputation or the opinions of the capital's leaders. The officer nods with a sadistic grin, confirming that the opinion of his superiors in the government has never meant the slightest value to him. He stares intently at the boy and states that he will accept the offer to instantly upgrade the dungeon's rank. Sensing the seriousness of his rival's words, Hitoya activates his bright blue aura and agrees, head held high, to the terms presented. The gray-haired hunter walks toward the center of the clearing and mockingly announces that he has only one condition for closing the deal. Enveloped in a gigantic and terrifying red aura of combat, Asura demands that the young chief fight with all his might to prove his true worth. Holding the hilt of his katana firmly, Asura warns that the weak will inevitably be eliminated from that world. He claims that the supreme law of that reality dictates that weak beings have absolutely no value to society. With his eyes gleaming a murderous red, the swordsman orders the young chief to prove whether he is truly strong enough to continue existing. Hitoya stands in absolute silence before his fearsome opponent, gathering all his magical energy for the battle. He fondly remembers the warm hug he received from his little friends, recalling that physical strength is not the only kind of value that exists. With a look overflowing with fury and determination, the boy warns his rival that he absolutely refuses to lose to him again. Asura flashes a wide, insane grin and warns that, if so, they should make the most of that fun battle. The swordsman leaps forward, unleashing swift blows, while the young skeleton also charges forward at his rival. The boy anxiously calculates that if he is struck again by the sword of a transcendental, his life in that dungeon will truly come to an end. Even knowing the immense danger, he vows to himself that he will find a clever way to win that impossible battle. Asura performs a perfect circular motion with his katana, unleashing a gigantic cross-shaped burst of red energy. Hitoya demonstrates absurd reflexes, performing incredible aerial acrobatics to escape the destructive trail of the enemy's attack. He realizes he can predict the trajectory of the techniques, but knows that simply dodging continuously won't be enough, so he activates his wind blade. To the boy's dismay, the swordsman simply destroys the green wind projectiles using the brute force of his own cuts. The boy changes strategy and activates his phantom attack to create fast-moving illusions and try to confuse his rival's vision. However, Asura draws his katana with surgical precision and slices through all the illusory copies without showing the slightest difficulty. Hitoya recoils in fear, noticing that his opponent's attacks easily cut through his magical techniques and that none of his own attacks are effective. The villain rests his sword on his shoulder and comments, laughing, that if the boy is so keen to decipher his special abilities, he will make sure to reveal the secret. The gray warrior gripped the hilt of his katana with full force, concentrating an immense amount of magical energy into its blade. The system confirms the activation of its powerful absolute cutting special ability, illuminating the entire scene with a reddish glow. Asura unleashes a devastating sword strike that cuts through everything in its path toward the boy. The destructive gust of wind splits the ground in two, creating a huge fissure in the damp underground forest floor. The young chief is utterly horrified to see that the hunter has literally cut the earth itself with the blade of his sword. The imperial warrior calmly stands in the middle of the open crater and explains that his magic weapon has the property of slicing through any matter in the world. Displaying a terribly sadistic grin, Asura arrogantly asserts that this is the legendary and appealing secret ability of his katana. Hitoya is completely shocked when he encounters a special technique that completely breaks the combat rules of that game. He realizes with horror that none of his defensive spells will work against a sword attack capable of nullifying any magical barrier. Positioned in the middle of the forest clearing, the scientist Turin observes the course of that fierce battle with keen eyes. The researcher in the white lab coat analyzes that there are no visible openings in Asura's defense that the boy could try to exploit in combat. The bespectacled wizard warns the young skeleton that it would be utter folly to try and find something that Asura's sword cannot slice through. Hitoya tensely agrees, understanding that if the enemy katana can indeed cut through everything, brute force will not be enough to stop it. The boy clenches his gleaming fist and concludes that there is no conventional way to directly block that terrible steel blade. The boy makes a decisive move and charges forward at high speed toward the hunter, initiating his final attack. The boy makes a decisive move and charges forward at high speed toward the hunter, initiating his final attack. Turin watches the scene in utter horror, wondering if the boy has gone mad for trying to attack a transcendental head-on like that. Asura displays a furious expression upon seeing the direct frontal attack and prepares his katana to slice his opponent in half at once. The fair-haired scientist fears for his ally's life, knowing that Hitoya's tail won't withstand the direct impact against the metal of the sword. In the last millisecond, the boy focuses his determined gaze and decides to completely change his way of thinking about how to stop that terrible weapon.